Did your old gods ever answer you, Ned? She wondered. When you knelt before your heart tree, did they hear you? I love that kind of quiet desperation and that leaning out
Yeah.
for a connection. She's taking the faith and the more ephemeral kind of connection to the gods through her religion and tying it to a personal space for her, to the memory of her husband and that deepest loss that she's facing at the moment, and beyond all the
There,
uncertainty and the fear of everything that's going to come. She hasn't properly grieved
there's
for Ned yet, and this is a beautiful
yeah.
encapsulation of that.
Both of these Baratheon brothers kind of find a point, like a sort of confluence of conflict, where like the principle and the end result, the ends justifying the means. There is a serious moral question that is of relevance to both of those characters. But with Renly, he's not threatening to do anything as wild as, say, upending the traditional established religion of the setting just to achieve an end. He's not harsh to the point of cruelty as Stannis can be.
A lot is done by Martin here to establish the connection between winter as a physical geographical aspect of the climate, but also the more poetic aspect of the winter of discontent.
And then we're told a cloud of ravens burst out of Dragonstone.
I love
You
that.
know,
I
going to
love that
yeah,
so much.
yeah,
Such a
every
cool
every
visual.
seat. Yeah, every king, everyone who was calling themselves a king at the time, every high lord, every landed knight, everywhere, every tower, every seat, every hall, everywhere got a raven saying, "Look, we're kings now."
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis, a Song of Ice and Fire. I'm Callum, this is Matt,
Hey, seven blessings. Welcome everybody.
and today we're going to be talking about the first 4 chapters of Catelyn's POV today.
Yes,
Lead us into that,
in a
Matt.
Clash of Kings. Yeah, a Clash of Kings, book two of A Song of Ice and Fire. And so yeah, the first handful of chapters for Catelyn. And I don't know, like did we even really mutually agree together about like why we decided to look at these?
Well,
Or
you were the one who raised
was it
this
just
one as
because they're great?
these 4 as particularly
Yeah.
interesting, and we kind of, as we were going through the first 3, I think we realised, the fourth needs to be covered here actually,
Yeah.
because it makes a nice
Yeah,
kind of
that's right.
bookended sequence of them.
Yeah.
But also, it works nicely
So
as a general primer and introduction to our views on Catelyn as a character, because she's one of our, I think it's probably fair to say, one of our favourites in the book,
oh yeah. Yeah, that's
particularly
definitely true
because
of
of her,
me.
her relevance, and just the I love that she was a chosen perspective to kind of to reveal and explore the scenes and what's actually going on at this point in the series. I think this is a really good set to cover, kind of to introduce what she is for us. So do you want to open them with that?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, to give a very broad overview of what these chapters are about, so if anybody uh doesn't know, or you should know, this is very like spoiler,
Yeah, yeah. Spoiler intensive.
heavy.
Read these
Spoil,
first.
yeah, spoiler. Yes, yeah. Don't come in here fresh. Um, so yeah, the events of book one have happened, where we have a country that's on the brink of war. Ned Stark has obviously been recently would you say murdered, executed,
Absolutely.
like in King's Landing, and so you have his son Rob, has become king in the north, and also of the Riverlands, which we tend to forget. That's sort of what he's
Mm.
claiming to hold here because his uncle Edmure is well, no, his grandfather's still in charge. I always forget Hoster Tully is alive.
It's
He's
very
technically
easy
alive.
to be fair, in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah.
the relevance to the story.
Yeah, but yeah, so like she Catelyn is obviously a part of like her son's sort of roving court because they're all marching, be ready to bring battle to the Lannisters. You've got Joffrey, who's nominally a Baratheon, who's ruling in King's Landing. Then you have two other Baratheons, Robert's younger brothers, Stannis and Renly, who both have claim to the throne. I don't quite know what Renly's is. We'll discuss that later, but
Bigger army diplomacy,
uh,
essentially.
bigger army, yeah, because he can, damn it. But and then you have at some point the Greyjoys get involved, which we will talk about in depth another day. Um, and is that all five of them? I think so.
Hmm.
So it's the War of Five Kings. It's often been pointed out that Renly dies before technically the Greyjoys really get involved. So technically, there was never a point where all five of them were
But why
in
let
the
the
fields
truth
of
get in
battle
the way of
all
a
at
good
once.
story? Especially for an historical
Sure,
take of the
sure.
naming, anyway.
And so the reason we're starting with Catelyn, this actually isn't the first time we've done this. We did do a John chapter that we recorded before this, so that may or may not come up before these. But Catelyn is a character who I think, alongside Tyrion, probably does like the most to kind of shoulder the burden of connecting the overarching um, political drama as it's unfolding, at least to start off with in this book. After a while, people like Davos the Onion Knight kind of also bring an almost equal amount of strength to bear with ferreting out what's going on around Stannis' court. But we meet that cast of characters through a different character's eyes, which is Maester Cresson, who's uh, the POV of the prologue for this second book. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think the prologue to book two is probably the single best prologue he ever wrote. There's a prologue in each book. I think
Seconded,
that
yeah.
one is amazing.
It's
And
purely
the
the
only
amount of heavy
reason,
lifting that one's doing. I mean,
yeah,
even putting aside the fact that it's fantastically written and it's got all of the
yeah,
emotional and character focused beats that it has, which it does masterfully. That one is trying to bring into the story so much more than any of the others have to. You know, it's trying to recap
mhm,
everything that's come before it. It's trying to bring in, here's a whole slew of other characters, and particularly the political and story presence of Stannis. It does.
yeah,
I mean, and even with things like the magic, you know, it's touching on so
yeah,
much within the world, and broadening what we've come to expect from the series up to that point. It's a really powerful prologue, and definitely one I think that we'll cover in
yes.
depth in its own
Wait,
video.
I I would certainly love to cover it. The only reason why I was itching to cover other things first is because for probably for the reason you've just given, because it is such a good chapter, many other people have already, covered the prologue like down to like minute detail, like every line
Mm.
of it has been analyzed and everything. And I just wanted the opportunity to, if not say something new, then just something a little bit less covered ground, you know? So and Catelyn is also, we should probably get this out of the way.
Mm.
She's a character that I think gets a really bad rap, and we can discuss that more in depth as it comes up.
Well, yeah, I think we'll lead
But
into that after we explain why we like her so much, because I think
okay,
that could work as a
yeah,
nice tail end. But yeah, it's weird that she's as disliked as much as she is, given the company she keeps within this narrative.
yes, yes.
Because
So
the rules that apply to her don't seem to apply to many other characters, which is strange to say the least. But yeah, go
yeah,
launch in with why you love her so much, Matt.
with why I love Catelyn.
Mm.
Well, to the really really put a in a to distill it down to the bare essence, she's maybe the cleverest character outside of Tyrion. When we're first starting off, who's POV? I mean to say, there's
Yes,
lots
yeah,
of
yeah.
clever characters in the story, but whose POV that you actually get. Um, Catelyn understands politics in a way that Ned didn't really. I mean, Ned understood things, but he wasn't good at playing the game. Catelyn was clearly. You get the idea that like Catelyn is also, she's also, this isn't commented on by very many people, but Catelyn is maybe like about as highborn as you can get, maybe the highest born woman outside of
It's easy
the
to forget with the
royal
fact that it's the
family.
Riverlands family
Yeah,
that she's coming from there, because they don't, because of the nature of it, they don't hark on it very much. They don't big it up too much. But yeah, in terms of her political
yes.
standing, she is definitely up there as the highest POV.
And her sister, her younger sister, is maybe the only other woman who, on paper, has more personal power because she's a regent in the Vale. And so outside the royal family, that is,
Mm.
so it's like, so Catelyn, you understand that she was raised, at like the forefront of like the court politics of this setting, so she understands things in a way that not everyone does, and for as much as she can be cruel or wrong or yeah, just wrong, just mistaken
Mm.
sometimes, right, as opposed to just something more mean spirited. Um, she does, I think, I truly believe, have a good heart, at the core of things, and so like it's just a perspective that I really love. And again, we said spoiler alert, but I miss after a point because obviously she kind of dies,
Just a
comes
bit.
back, but she kind of, yeah, she only a little bit because she does come back, but it's not Catelyn, right?
Yeah.
She's someone else. So yeah, I mean, I really love Catelyn chapters, and I find that I do miss them, and she's one of the reasons I never get tired of revisiting the early books so much. Um,
And for me, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said there. It's partly why I love her as well. The thing that makes her so fascinating to me, and kind of adds to that, is that through the layer of her being as clever as she is and as politically astute as she is, particularly in contrast to her husband Ned, because obviously for the first book we've seen Detective Ned going through and just like bull-headedly trying to charge through with that Stark mentality to not even bother trying to play the game. She is aware of how the game's played and is pretty good at it herself. But one of the things I find so enjoyable about it is that, like you said, she gets a lot wrong, and I find it fascinating that she can be as wrong as she is so often as she is without it ever colouring my enjoyment of her character, because it's
Yeah,
told, the way it manifests is told through the other kind of heart of her persona, which is I think probably the root of her character, if she was to explain it herself. She is first and foremost a mother, and she deeply loves her family, and she's going through, I mean, particularly with these chapters, she's actively going through a very fresh mourning period. I mean, she's lost her
yeah.
husband, she's losing her family, either to distance or to actual loss later in the series. She is someone who is going through winter. Effectively, winter has come for her, and it's something that is used within the prose of these chapters. Um, so when she's talking to the people, as we're going to go into scene by scene in bits and pieces of the chapters here, when she's talking to the people she's talking to and making the claims and calls that she is, oftentimes she's right. Oftentimes she's desperately trying to get others to see why she's right. But when those bits and pieces of her being wrong come up, it's always, or almost always, through the lens of, I'm a mother and I'm prioritizing that over everything else, as you should be.
Yes.
And in many ways you should be. You should care about your sister's rob more than you care about your kingship. But if you're talking from a political perspective, you're talking through the lens of the power that he's having to wield and responsibilities, etc. She's not connecting with him on that. And I like how when she struggles to connect with the people she's struggling to connect with, it's almost always through the lens of differing priorities, and how that shapes her perspective throughout the series, and then particularly the sequences within the book. I find that fascinating because the space she operates within the kind of cast, there isn't another character. Ironically enough, probably with the exception of Cersei, in a very different way. And she actually mentions a little bit of that in this. Yeah, she mentions that herself. Yeah. Like, she thinks Cersei's a mother. Cersei, gave birth to these children. She would defend them in this way. She's the only one who has that headspace and that perspective. So I love that Martin chose her to be the lens for these particular political scenes and this particular drama, because it shows how someone within her place in the world, the seat of power that she has in terms of being a highborn lady, while also being restricted by the lack of a voice that the women had in this era, or in this world at this time. She has so much to give in so many ways, and seeing her struggle with that without it ever being kind of the point of it all. It's there all the time. It's part of who she is because of the natural extension of what she's having to go through. But it's never like she's walking around, if only, which Cersei does a little bit later on in a very different way, in a very good way. But she's never walking around, if only I was a man, this would be so much easier, etc. It's always, no, I must be strong. I must take my strength from the roots of I've been given, either my highborn training or my responsibility to my father or my memories of my mother. All the stuff that comes up here in these chapters explain and encapsulate who she is as a character, and writes large all of the little bits of nuance that stretch out throughout the rest of the series as to why we love her so much, I think.
For sure.
To say all of that, I do not understand why people dislike this character. Like you mentioned, the things with Jon and the issues she does absolutely have. They're always presented through very human traits. She struggles with these things for very real human reasons. The aspect of how, you're a bastard of my husband. My husband cheated on me. She doesn't just hate him for no reason. It's wrong to hate him, absolutely, and it's certainly wrong to mistreat him and let that hatred spill out into action. But that doesn't mean it's not coming from a human place.
So there's a couple of things there, just because we'll dive into the chapter proper and the ones that follow soon. But just to zoom out real quick, why people hate her, I think there's sort of 3 or 4 quasi reasons. Two of which I can understand, only to a point. I don't understand the point that people take them to, but I understand the logic people use to get there. The other points I can't quite follow, but I'll name them anyway. And they're harder to prove. It's more of an intuition thing on my part. But the first one, so you already talked about Jon. I'll give people the Jon one. Jon also, book Jon particularly, is such a stronger character than show Jon,
and is
that
beloved in particular.
he's I mean, you fall in love with Jon, and she's so mean to Jon. Like, I mean, she's not just like, get out of here, the bastard, I don't have time for you. I need no absolution from you, bastard, and you should have died, not my Bran. She's terrible. She's like Cinderella's stepmother,
really
or something.
Is, yeah.
She's the Ice Queen, and at the same time, I kind of love that, because it's such a severe, heinous flaw that it's hard to reconcile. She's the ultimate mother in the story to a point with that, and it's like, but why is she that way? Ned I put that mostly on Ned. And at the same time, I understand Ned. Ned was obviously all we know about what he did with Lyanna for sure is he promised like 3 or 4 times. I promise, I promise, I promise. He's not going to break his promise to his dying sister, whatever the promises were.
But
One of them
she should have
presumably
been
is
a leeway
you
though.
don't
Like,
tell
yeah,
anybody. Yeah,
Catelyn could
yeah,
have been
yeah,
just that one example
yeah,
of leeway for the sake
yeah.
of her own
It's like
sanity and John's well-being
he
in particular.
he didn't even give we're not talking about like he gave her a lie. He won't even give her a lie. He won't give her anything to work with who is this? Like who did and also and she thinks about this in the first book, and it's one of my favorite chapters in the early book. I think it's Catelyn 2. But it could be the first one. It could be the first ever one. But John was brought to Winterfell even before she and Robb were.
Hmm.
Like John beat her to her home. Like, it's you can't just say, well, he's here and deal with it and don't ever ask me about it. You can't do that, Ned.
What's the great line? I
You
wish I could just wish away my feelings.
yeah, yeah, sure. Great line, yeah. But I mean, it's just I feel for her, and at the same time, I just I almost want to cry just because she's just terrible to John, and I love John. Like John's one of
Hmm.
my favorite characters. So it's really one that I struggle with. The second big point about why people hate her, she arrested Tyrion, which prompts the Lannisters to
Yeah, she'd have
start
kind
a
of
war.
pushed that first domino over for the setting a bit, didn't she?
And so you do have this, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know what she was supposed to think happened. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, when you think about what happened to her son and all that they were able to tell him, that somebody did try to murder him after he didn't die from falling out the window. Um, I get what she was thinking must have happened, and she has such limited information. So I'll give the fans that one. They're right. She started this sorta. At the
And
same
also, on
time,
top of that, it's very easy to forget that in universe, Tyrion's reputation, the Lannisters' reputation in particular, is not what it is for the reader. The reader knows that
yes,
Tyrion is an exception to the rule, but in
yeah.
the book in particular, Tyrion does not make it clear. He does not advertise himself well. He does not comport himself with the that first step into a scene where, hey guys, I'm not an arsehole Lannister. He wears the arrogance as a shield in a way they do, just with a different flavor. Only the reader gets to see behind that. At
Yeah.
this stage of the story, and certainly from
Yeah, I mean
Catelyn's perspective.
he did some good things, but they were all off page. Like we know
Hmm.
that he was courteous after Bran's accident. That great bit everyone remembers from the show where he's slapping Joffrey and saying, "You'll go over there and you know
I love that.
you get the set you know that he did do the same. It just happened off page, and
Hmm.
you didn't see her interaction with it. So was she aware that he was good? Because she was like catatonic with grief. Like she
Yeah,
was
well,
nuts
exactly.
for
Yeah,
like a little bit,
even if he'd been the perfect character to her at that point,
Yeah.
she's not going to be taking it on
Yeah.
board. She's a grieving mother. Her son is about to
Yes.
die, likely to die. And if
Yes.
best case paralyzed forever. So it's
But
this is not the
but
headspace
so
that people should be judging her on.
we say that we say this all to say we understand where she's coming from. The fans are also right. She made a big
Yes.
error there. Then I lose any ability to really come to grips with why people hate her. I'm just gonna say it, I think a lot of it's an anti-woman thing. People judge women more harshly than men. When I say people, I tend to mean men. Um, uh, do this a lot, an awful lot, and it kind of baffles me where I don't quite get what you're getting out of a story that's written this richly and this well. Like, what do you appreciate about this story if you're also
Blind to
like,
the
yeah, about
nuance of the other
yeah,
perspective. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. But that again, I can't prove that. It's just the strong vibe I get from a lot of people. I really can't understand hating her. I just can't. I can understand having quibbles with her. I can understand just disagreeing with her to the point of like I would be an enemy of hers on these political points or whatever, but I don't understand
Well,
hatred of her. And you know what I mean? I just
know.
don't.
I would completely agree and
Theon
understand it
the
more.
character.
And the thing that makes it even weirder to me is the fact that, I mean, look at the company she keeps within this cast of characters. People do not dislike Jamie. I mean, people actively love Jamie as a character, and
Right.
he pushes Bran
Yeah.
out of a window for basically no reason. I mean,
Yes.
obviously he does have a reason, but not one that's justifiable in any way, shape, or
The things
form.
we do for love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so callous. He's not even like, oh, I wish I didn't have to
Yes.
do this. He's just, I don't give a damn at all. And it's not the only thing he does. He's a much more tarnished character, but he doesn't
Yeah.
even catch
Bearing in
a
mind,
tenth of the
yeah.
flack that she does.
Bearing in mind, even Cersei criticized him for that. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that? Like even Cersei was like that. So I mean, it is not necessarily because he pushed a child. It's more like just how stupid are you? Like what? How are we going to explain this kind of a thing?
Yeah,
Kind of a
exactly.
thing.
It's a lack of
I just
subtlety that she's objecting to more than the cruelty. But yeah,
yes.
just but there's so many other characters. I mean, characters people enjoy more, and it's okay to enjoy. Don't get us wrong. You know, it's great
Mhm.
to love to hate a character. I mean, Joffrey's fantastic. He's not particularly nuanced by any means, but he's well written in how much we're supposed to hate him. But
Yes.
people don't. With Jamie in particular, people love the character. They really enjoy him. They want to see a
And
redemption
he's
out
an
of him.
amazing
They enjoy the
character.
path
Yeah.
and that he takes on that, etc. On that road. But then they don't hold the whole, child killing and all the rest of the stuff that he does against him in the same
Yes.
way that Catelyn does. Have
This
held
is what
against
I
her. It's
mean,
very
and
strange.
this has been talked about a lot, and we'll talk about the works of Joe Abercrombie eventually. But for anybody, and I won't go into details, but uh, much far more people will hate Giselle. People love Giselle, but far more people will hate him who than Glockta, example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when you think about who does more wrong though throughout the story, you know,
It's not even a
easy answer.
contest.
It's like it's not even close, but it's that kind of effect, whatever that is. But yeah, so those are the forces that play for why I think, when it comes to Catelyn having a bad rap. I do though see the longer a work like this has shares time in like the limelight like it has, and the more voices come to like give their account of why they like or what they critique or what they enjoy about the setting and the mythos and the characters. Um, Certain things kind of experience it's like a reassessment of opinion in terms of like whatever is going like the kind of pervading what is that the prevailing wisdom, and I think that Catelyn is going through those. I see lots of people recently, like in the last handful of weeks, saying I love Catelyn actually, and
Mm,
they typically are fans who happen to also be women. So I just notice a little correlation there, but it's a nice sign. That people are I mean, for example, I was somebody who I didn't quite love A Feast for Crows when I first read that. That might be maybe my favorite book. It certainly has some of our favorite chapters, like Aunt
mm.
Jenna. I
Oh,
mean,
Aunt Jennifer is amazing.
you know, isn't she?
Crime that
It's
she
like
didn't get a shot in the. I understand why she didn't get a shot in the show, but my god, it would have been good.
it would have been so good. But I mean, it was, and she actually is kind of referenced in like an insulting way because it's sort of like,
Yeah.
okay, that's a reference that only book readers would understand, but that's not how Jamie would have thought of her. But okay,
Mm,
so we could have seen her, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's just I think that Catelyn is having has had like a sort of complicated history with the fandom. I say the fandom, just readers. It's so big. When you talk about
mm.
fandoms this big or readerships this big, there's such a wide array of opinions. But we love Catelyn, and like warts and all kind of a thing. We're not blind to her flaws, but
Yeah, for
she's
sure.
an amazing character, amazing character.
But that's
But
essentially
this
our
first
primer on
chapter,
her as a character, and these are the kind of
yeah,
the chapters that really, for this book in particular, bring you into that. And we see a lot of the nuance that we didn't quite get to explore in the first book quite the same way, because obviously the first book is doing all the heavy lifting of establishing the story and the setting and the
yes,
plot that's going to be moving forward. You don't get quite as rich a dive into the backstory and the
yeah.
mentality of the POVs, and this is where you kind of really get to see that shine for Gatlin in the first instance. Um,
I think that the first thing I'd like to talk about is that this opening line is one of my favorites in the
mm,
book. And it's certainly the early book because like it's our reintroduction to the story through her eyes. So
mm,
we've met her before in the first book, as you just said, but this is the first time we're seeing her in book two. And I think aside from maybe the prologue itself, which begins with the comet, we've talked about that device of like the comet passing overhead and that sort of tying together all the individual perspectives. The prologue line is the comet's tail spread across the dawn, a red slash that bled above the crags of Dragonstone, like a wound in the pink and purple sky. That's a pretty killer line, and like I said, that comet is so central to tying all these in. Then
mm,
you get like a a bunch of other ones that are all good in their way. Some of them are more childlike perspective. Some of them are more in the order of like scene setting. It's just telling you what the weather is like here or what this person looks like. They're all good. But you have to go like, what is this? I think the seventh chapter overall, if you're counting the
mm.
prologue. Um, you get the next hers, which I just think is fantastic. It just blows the other ones out of the water. So it's Her son's crown was fresh from the forge, and it seemed to Catelyn Stark that the weight of it pressed heavy on Rob's head. I love that line. I'd like to just talk about it's not a run-on sentence. It's not a particularly short sentence, but it's not long. And you're getting her frame of mind. You're seeing exactly what she's seeing happen, which is a dramatic image of somebody wearing a crown fresh from the forge, which is a nice bit of alliteration right there.
Mm.
You have Catelyn Stark, like so her name, she's talking about her son. She's a mother, so like, this is her thought, but her thoughts are all about her child. And it ends with like his name, Rob's head. You know what I mean? Like heavy on Rob's head. So it's concern for the child. There's so much information there. This could have been the opening of a book in a book one. You know what I mean? Like you without context, this is still a great introduction to the scene. You know what I
and
mean?
and her as
Her
a
son,
character as well, and
yeah,
it's
her
and
character,
it's not just
his
contained
name,
within its
her
own
name.
context. It's going to
Yeah.
be linking to all of the other chapters to follow with from the way she's looking at things. And she judges the different crowns that she encounters as she moves through the political scenery that we're gonna be going to in a bit. She judges each
Yes.
crown on its design. She judges how it's being worn. She sees the person beneath it. Like you say, in this instance, she's struggling to see the person beneath it as anything but her son, because as she actively, explicitly kind of dives into in her thoughts, um, you know,
Yes.
and how odd was that for her? How weird was it for her to think of this child as a king, because he's Rob. She remembers him being a little toddler running around the castle. I like that you get
Did you
all
want
these
to?
different background pieces of nuance just from this first line without ever having to state anything of to it explicitly.
Yes. Did you want to go through this next passage, or did you want to go through the crowns individually later? Because the next passage is all about the
We can do the
crown of the
crowns as they
kings
come
of
up, I
winter.
think, because it'll relate to the
Okay.
specific scenes as we encounter the different kings. So that works
Okay.
that
Because
way, I think.
this for me, this and just like a sort of brief substance of like what the or summary of what's going on in the chapter is enough for me on this one. Um, I'm more interested in getting to like the meat of the other chapters. But this begins with like a sort of treatise on like what the ancient crown of the kings of winter was. And so the line is, the ancient crown of the kings of winter had been lost 3 centuries ago, yielded up to Aegon the Conqueror when Torrhen Stark knelt in submission. What Aegon had done with it no man could say. Lord Hoster Smith had done his work well, and Rob's crown looked much as the other was said to have looked in the tales told of the Stark kings of old. An open circlet of hammered bronze, incised with the runes of the first men, surmounted by 9 black iron spikes, wrought in the shape of long swords. Of gold and silver and gemstones it had none. Bronze and iron were the metals of winter, dark and strong to fight against the cold. So that's
It's a
the
beautiful
crown.
description
So
by itself, but again, calling forward to what it's going to be representing later in the chapters. A lot is done by Martin here to establish the connection between winter as a physical geographical aspect of the climate, but also the more poetic aspect of the winter of discontent, the stuff that the
mhm.
characters are going to be having to go through, the challenges and dramas they're going to be facing. Catelyn is in the midst of her own winter already, and she's seeing everything through that lens. And later when we get these are nights of summer, these are youthful types. This is a character who is yet to face the hardship and darkness they're going to. The worry of the cloud hanging that over them all, but particularly for a family and her son looking at him here.
Yeah.
He's laying the foundations for all of the kind of the beats he's going to be hitting with her perspective in the next 4 chapters. And he does it right from the outset, just with the description of a crown, which we have to have anyway because it's scene setting and it's showing the visual of the character. But he never wastes a moment. He always squeezes every last ounce of purpose he can from any given scene opening. Scene
Hmm.
in general, but particularly his openers, they're always very strong. Even when we joked before the recording about how the one for John was just Sam. He said.
Yes. And it's followed up by
Yeah, exactly. He
a
follows it
brilliant
up with that
description.
perfect. And this is that here.
Yeah.
The first line doesn't need the follow up of a brilliant description because it's powerful just
Yeah.
by itself, but he does it anyway. Like he always puts a lot of
Yes.
concerted effort into hammering out these openers and really hooking the reader in for every chapter perspective. Um,
And the other thing about his work, Martin's writing, is that his setting is it could sometimes seem like it's the same handful of core ideas over and over again. And that might be true, but I love it. I love how he's very specific with his language. And again, he pays a lot of attention to like his prose, and I want people to think about which words does he say over and over again, or at the very least multiple times, and not necessarily within a passage, but within the complete work. Um, there might not be anything special about the line of gold and silver and gemstones it had none. Bronze and iron were the metals of winter, dark and strong to fight against the cold. Bronze and iron, that's part of an oath that's sworn later in this same book that
Mm.
Winterfell, when the reeds come. So it's like his mythos, whatever it is, because it's still unveiling itself to us. He knows exactly what he's doing with all these things. These things mean something. So it's really really cool, and that's something that you can't get on a first time reading. Oh, bronze and iron, cool. The
There is a
metals of
lot
winter,
of that.
sure.
I mean, the fans in
You know,
particular. We talked about the mysteries in our primer. This is the kind of thing that people you will dive down to pick up. The single individual
yeah.
notes in one line of a one massive
Mhm.
passage. They'll go, that means something, and they'll put it on their crazed
Yes.
conspiracy theorist
Yeah.
board. It's like that means
It all
this,
does mean
and
something. It all does
and
mean
yeah,
something. Yeah.
you can tell just from the way he's piecing everything together in the kind of holistic work that it is absolutely going somewhere. The problem is, of
Mhm.
course, as we mentioned in the previous video, is that we don't yet know where and might never know. So it's like this cloud of come on, just give us something, just give us a little bit of morsel, just solve one mystery, just rubber stamp some
Yeah.
of it. You don't
Yeah.
have to explain all of it, and as we always say, you shouldn't explain all of your mysteries, but just give us something so that it isn't all just a lattice work that's going to collapse on itself. It will be left as a
Yes.
void that we never know.
Yes. So, the actual business of this chapter, just to explain what's going on, is this is in the wake of Ned's death. Rob is offering peace terms to the Lannisters.
Offering peace
Um,
terms in quotation marks.
yeah, he's not asking for very much, but
Just a
and
complete
at the same
capitulation,
time,
pretty much, to all of his
yeah,
demands that he knows aren't going to be accepted.
yeah, he's talking about taking, away two of the seven kingdoms and no longer owing any fealties to the Iron Throne, and he wants his dad's bones back, and he wants the sword ice to be returned, and he wants his sisters, and he wants a bunch of hostages and all this stuff. But at the same time, I mean, they killed his father for no fucking
Yeah, no,
reason
no,
after they made him
yeah.
swear
Don't
in
get me
his own
wrong.
good
Don't get me
name,
wrong. He's not being he's being unreasonable, but he's doing it with intentionality. The author and the
Yes.
character. It's not about just I'm going to be silly and overreach here. He knows he's not going to get this. He knows he can't expect to get this, but he's trying to make a point that
He's also been he's also been winning so far in
Yeah,
the battles that
exactly. Yeah,
have
he's
been
riding
fought.
that
So
momentum.
there's
He's
that.
setting up, a bit of a
Yeah.
trajectory and laying the groundwork for future negotiations. This isn't just he does a very good job, Martin, of establishing the fact that John, while being very wise and very clever, he is still young. He rides the balance between youth and naivety and competence very well. Like he's not. He is. You can tell he would be a very good king if he was given the chance
Yeah.
to grow into it. And he's doing a very good
Sure.
job for his age, absolutely right now. But there are bits and pieces here that you see where and
Can
Catelyn
I?
tries to raise these that he's not doing everything as clear cut and as carefully
Oh,
as he perhaps could be. Usually
I
for the
would like
reason of
to
trying
say,
to ride the bannermen as well. He's trying to
yeah,
keep them on side, which is a bit that she doesn't quite fully appreciate.
I would like to say very quickly because I think we've probably said at some point that the first season of the show was almost perfectly adapted from the first book. So there's very little lost in translation. One of those things, though, I think that I'm always struck by whenever I revisit the first book, Game of Thrones, as it's also called in the book series, is Rob as a character. This is a thing that it applies to all the characters. All the characters were aged up,
Understandably,
for
yeah.
one reason or another. And so Rob is like 15 in the books, as Catelyn's just thinking to herself in this very chapter. Um, and in the show, I don't know exactly how old he's supposed to be, but he's a young man. He's not a child. And he, in the first book, he's got like a lot of moments with Bran where like they weren't a thing in the show really. They had like a loose equivalent to some of them, but there are times where you can really feel like how scared he is. I mean, his dad's not there. His dad's arrested and being called a traitor. His mom's not around. He's got to be the Lord of Winterfell. His brother's sitting broken in bed, and you don't get a Rob POV, which is something that I think Martin may have given voice to having mild regrets about in more recent years. I think he sometimes wonders why that didn't happen. But we don't have a Rob POV, but you have almost the next best thing particularly in books 1 and 2, where you're seeing uh, scenes like this, where it's clear he's got a lot of potential, but he is basically still a child,
But he's not. He's a
and thrust
man. He's
into
almost a man grown. That's the
yeah,
famous line
they
that
all
keeps coming
yeah
up all the way through the
yeah
series. I'm almost a man grown.
yeah
Like these kids desperate to
yes
grow up and be seen as
yes
having done so.
yeah. There's a bit I couldn't tell you which chapter it is, which Bran chapter it is, but there's a bit that kind of ends with just him and Bran kind of sitting in the dark, and they're kind of crying about their parents not being around, or at least Rob is crying, and they're just kind of like together and just being like bad brothers in a dark room. And it's just whenever I read that, I go, that was so not in the show, and it really like hits me hard. Like I forgot that this scene existed, kind of a thing. It's really really powerfully written. So again, there's always a reason to pick up these books, even if you know the story, because there's some things that are so powerful that just aren't there, or things that are just so different.
Hmm.
But so the piece terms, was there anything you wanted to discuss in terms of like the prose or any character dialogue or anything? I don't have too
Not
much to say
particularly.
about this.
No, not anything in like in specific detail. I like how effectively he's recapping everything. He's resummarizing where we are from and where we've got to from the first book. He's always very good at this, as we've spoken to before. But he doesn't waste any time. He's reestablishing the political situation and the narrative so that the reader is caught up and knows what's happening and why they should care about everything. Particularly that latter point, he really focuses on the characters here, significant and minor, with Uncle, with his bannerman, etc. It's clear that the reader understands why Rob's making the decisions he is, both in terms of his emotions and reacting to the fact that he's just had his dad murdered, and also in the political terms. The fact that he understands in a way that we see that Catelyn understands but doesn't really care about, for obvious reasons. He's making clear points that are valid and true. So at no point do you feel like because
Yeah.
this kid is out of his depth. He clearly knows what he's doing. It's the rough edges on the end that would be usually smoothed out by experience. The whole chapter kind of sets that up, lets us know what's going
And
to be
it's
happening
also
with the trajectory of the rest of the book from the Stark side, but also leaves a bit of mystery to see. Okay, how is it going to happen? Where is it going to go in specific terms? So he sets it
and to
up,
your
he
point
lays it out, and he gets people excited for what's to come.
and to your point earlier about how Catelyn is like the perfect character to string this together for, it wouldn't really matter even if he was fully like evolved and like a full
Mm.
grown man and a perfect king. His terms would never have appealed to her. She's a mother, and the hostages that the Lannisters have, at least one of them, because Arya is in the wind, but she doesn't know that. The hostages that the Lannisters purport to have,
Mm.
um, they're her daughters.
Yeah.
You can't there's never going to be a way to sell this as sorry. There's nothing we can do about that at the moment. It's always going to be like a stinging wound.
And also, you
Um,
wouldn't want it to be. There are characters that you
yeah.
could have be cold and dismissive and understand. Okay, well, the priority of the many and the political takes precedent, all that stuff. But that wouldn't be Catelyn. Catelyn is a mother
Mhm,
first. That's how she
mhm.
sees herself. That's how she prides herself. And everything else matters to her. And obviously, you get the sense of the political drive is very present throughout, and particularly when she's trying to convince these other characters of perspectives that they're just not sharing with her. But yeah, it's
Yes.
her daughters first. What I like as well is that Rob, while clearly cares about his siblings as well, there's a touched on sense of detachment where he's managed to, in a way, I think he's probably trying to emulate his father. Not that Ned would have the
Hmm.
same reaction here, of course, but just from Rob's perspective of his father in this situation, he's trying to emulate that level of cool coldness where he's like, I
Hmm.
understand and I will do everything I can, but I realistically can't just sell the North and the Riverlands
Yeah.
for Sansa and Arya. He's taking that step. I like how it shows you the kind of sense of him still caring about that, but ultimately struggling through and having that level of detachment. That's really where the friction starts, because he doesn't like Catelyn pointing out the fact that he's doing that. He knows about it, he knows he's doing it, and he's consciously doing it and thinks that he has to, which is the real dividing line. She thinks that he doesn't.
Yes.
She'd be happy for him to throw away the crown and lose all the power of the North, etc.
Hmm.
And I think the thing
And
that
it
gives
sets
that the
up.
most power is the fact that she thinks he would be okay with that as well, which I think she's probably right about. But if it wasn't for the sense of responsibility that he thinks comes with it, he doesn't want the crown for his own power. He just thinks, now I've got it. I've got a responsibility that I can't give up. That's the kind of Stark
Yeah.
in him
I
speaking.
mean, yeah, he also is very cognizant of the fact that without a clear sense of purpose and like an objective, his men will start to crumble.
Exactly. Yeah,
Not
that's
because
the pragmatic problem that's being laid
it's
out here actively in the
yeah,
present, for sure.
it's not just because they're Northmen. It's like no, this is just the way things are done. Like I
Mm,
mean, it's like it's axiomatic. It's just I mean, we're not at home. Like we're far from home, and they have left their homes, their halls, their women, their children, their life to come be here. If we're not going to do anything, like I can't do this forever. I've
mm,
got to make some moves here. And the other people, the Lannisters, some of them are in their own halls. It's like they can wait this out if they want to. And she's proposing that they trade Jamie, for the girls. And he's like, I absolutely cannot do that. And it's not just because Jamie's Jamie. Jamie has also killed sons of his
mm.
bannermen here. I mean, it's like it's an insult to their children to then say, well, we'll do it for your children,
Yeah,
like even if they are
exactly.
my sisters.
And
But it also
she's not
tees up
fully engaging with that idea, because ultimately, while she
yeah,
understands it, she doesn't care at the moment. She's a grieving
she's a
mother
mother.
in this
Yeah.
instance, and
Yeah.
even if she wasn't grieving, I've got to get my girls back. I
Yes.
love that we
It,
get to sit in that space and never feel any kind of friction at the narrative level. We never feel like, oh God, Catelyn, just get over it, understand it properly.
right.
You're wholly with her the entire time, helped
Sure.
obviously by the fact that it's
Sure.
her POV. But even if you were in Rob's POV, you'd be thinking exactly the same thing. He's written this so elegantly throughout.
Yes. And it tees up the fact that when he does start making some serious blundering calls and she's the voice of reason, why we're not heeding her necessarily.
Mm.
It kind of builds up that escalating tension, and
She
maybe
d-
we'll talk about some of that later.
she does burn
And
some of her capital a lot of the time when she perhaps couldn't done.
yeah,
It's one of the reasons I like that she's flawed at the political level as well, because she's
mhm,
inexperienced. She has a lot of knowledge and wisdom and some experience as well to back that up, but she hasn't been able to sit in these spaces of power and properly develop her talents for it in the way that other
yeah,
characters with more of a voice in this world would. So seeing that, her burn capital and her rub people the wrong way, and her build these frictions with other minor characters, and have that kind of have consequences later, is really satisfying and really tragic as well. It turns up the tragedy meter to 11 when it really hits hard.
for sure. Right. So I don't have too many other things to discuss about this chapter in particular. There are other things we want to get to look at more in depth, but just a brief recap of the other things that I think are particularly well done here. We have attention paid to the character of Sir Cleos Frey, who is a small character in the grand scheme of things, but he's used to string an awful lot of things together. He's a cousin of the Lannister um, of the main Lannisters. It's always funny because I always want to call them the Lannister children. That's because they're Tywin's children, but none of them are children. You
Yeah,
know, so he's a cousin of Jaime, Cersei's, and Tyrion's. And he is the one that delivers these terms to King's Landing. He then is returned back to Robb with Cersei's reply, which, if you don't know, you probably could guess what that is. Then you have the fact that he is along for the journey of Jaime and Brienne's that takes place in a storm of swords. He doesn't make it through that. We then meet his parents through Jaime's perspective in one of our favorite chapters, which is Jaime meeting Aunt Jenna, who is Cleos's mother.
one of the best
So
characters in the whole series.
one of the
Just
best ever. Yeah,
objectively, she's such a flash
she's in
pan,
one
nothing
scene. She's
character.
in one
She's
scene. Yeah,
incredible. And that's I
yeah.
think you've mentioned before, that's something that's shared by the fandom as large as well. That's not just an us thing. Like, she's just one of
Everyone,
those
everyone,
beloved
everyone
characters
knows.
that everyone falls in love with.
Yeah, everyone loves pretty much everyone loves Jamie's entire run in the Feast for Crows, but everyone knows that like that scene between him and Aunt Jenna is like, top tier.
We'll definitely
And
get
we'll look
into
at
that
that
at
one of
some
these
point.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's sort of like a very consistent part of Catelyn's character that's by no means isolated to this chapter, but it begins here, of course, because the first time we're seeing her is the meditation she has on Ned and her role in the world now that he's gone. She just feels quite diminished. Um, her she's not really being a mother. She's not doing what a mother should be doing because she's off, you know, playing. Uh, what is she doing? She's a little bit of everything, really.
Yeah.
Sometimes she's somebody's captor, sometimes she's a messenger, sometimes she's giving a counsel, sometimes she's being ignored, sometimes people are heeding her. She's a woman. This is a place of battle. This is weird. She's not with her most of her children. She doesn't quite know where all of her children are. Her world's falling apart, and Ned's dead. So she very much feels his absence, and it constantly comes back, and it never feels like she's like beating a dead horse or
Mm.
just banging on about it. It always feels like, of course, she's thinking about this, and it's always very profound and insightful,
it,
and
it
I
helps that
love that.
he does a good job of her trying to kind of suppress it and not think about it while also always thinking about it. She's not
Hmm.
allowing herself. I mean, she wouldn't be able to even if she tried at this stage. It's too fresh. But she's not allowing herself to heal. So she's kind of repressing that. No, focus on the politics. Focus on what I can control. Focus on my family. Focus on my father. Focus on everything. She's trying not to wallow. And even
Hmm.
states it as a point of strength. I can't do that. I don't have time for self pity. I have to be strong here. Like my father, like my mother. He's really
Hmm.
spending the time in these chapters to kind of dive into why she's acting the way she is and why she feels she
Yeah.
has to, in particular. It's really, really strong.
And then to close out the chapter, she's meeting with her uncle, Brynden Tully, Sir Brynden Tully, who is a better known as the Blackfish, probably the family black sheep of the Tullys, and their sigil is
And the
a
badass.
trout, so he's called the Black. Yeah, he is a badass. Another disgraceful moment of the show is when he was just like killed off camera or whatever, just in some nothing storyline. But anyway,
Mm.
yeah, and he's not even dead in the books yet, So I mean, what the hell? But anyway, I just love their interaction as characters in all of their scenes. But big point that he brings in terms of what he brings to the story is kind of the news of what Gregor Clegane has been up to throughout the Riverlands, and he's sort of sacked Castle Derry and put the castle to the sword, including their young lord. And so Castle Derry is without a lord, and that might sound like some obscure detail amidst this grander thing, but it's not really. It's central to a lot of what goes on with the internal politics of the Lannisters from here on out, because the lordship is awarded to some of them, and it's kind of a disputed uh, prize. Like the castles that the Lannisters relieve of the River Lords, they come with certain pitfalls, and it's not necessarily a prize to be a lord of every single one of them, especially in a realm that does not welcome you or want you for their lords. So, and also Castle Derry is House Derry is not particularly relevant aside from being um, quite clutch to the Targaryens. They played a big role in the role of uh, supporting the royalists, the Robert's Rebellion. And I want to say Sir Willem Derry is the reason why Daenerys is still alive, basically. So the Darrys are an interesting house. They're the perfect example of what I love about Martin's world. You never really even, I think, meet a Derry like on page necessarily. I think one, Lyman Derry, the one who's Gregor had just killed. He's in like one scene with pledging his service to the king in the north, and the next thing you know, he's dead. But that house is the reason why Daenerys, the mother of dragons, is still around because one of them spirited her to safety during Robert's rebellion. So that kind of stuff is just the stuff I live for when it comes to how he's elected an amazing setting here. But yeah, and it just gives a sort of trajectory for what she's about to be going forward because she's going to be an emissary for Lord or King Renly, whatever we're kind of debating on what we're going to call him when we see him. But that'll be the substance of the next chapter we look at, right?
Absolutely.
So that brings us to A Clash of Kings, Catelyn 2, which is did you say 22nd chapter overall?
Yes,
Is that
yeah,
correct?
22nd in total.
Okay. Okay. So this chapter, I don't have as much to say about the actual goings on of it until toward the end in terms of like how it was written. This is a very well written chapter, and it does an awful lot. It's basically Renly's version of what Stannis got up front in the prologue of this book. We're seeing all the forces at his command that would make Renly king, if allowed. And so you're seeing the influence of the Tyrells. You're seeing all the different houses of like the Reach that have come, under their sort of banner. You have Renly's own factions who come direct from the Stormlands, and so you're kind of being introduced to the real. I think I'm right in saying that the Reach has the single greatest amount of knights in the Seven
It
Kingdoms.
would
So you're
make
seeing like the
sense,
real,
yeah, given its
yeah,
geography and its terrain. It's the
yeah,
most food rich, should we say, and resource rich
for
outside
sure.
of the Lannisters with the
It's
gold.
it's often called Yeah, it's often called the breadbasket of the Seven
Mm.
Kingdoms, which is a little bit giving them too much credit, but they do an awful lot to help places like the capital city, King's Landing, places like Old Town, particularly when times are bad or when we're entering winter or when we need things to fill the storage so we can make it through those times or to prevent starvation during a siege. Places like the Reach really help the other places get by. Places like Dorne are fairly self-sufficient. The Vale is pretty self-sufficient. The North, kind of just by virtue of being so far away, is that has to subsist on what it has to subsist on. Dorne has obviously always been kind of doing its own thing and isn't welcomed, culturally speaking, by very many other people. Most notably, probably the Storm Lords themselves, and by extension, the Reach. So, but it's a very important, key, fertile region, and it has there's a phrase Martin uses quite a lot. All the chivalry of the South rides with Renly, which is a great phrase,
I love that.
and a lot of it comes from the fact that the Reach is just so packed with knights and footmen and just men in general, really, to do the fighting. Um, the other big thing that happens in this, aside from seeing the influence of the great houses like Renly's faction of the Baratheons and the Tyrells, is we meet Brienne as a character properly for the first time, Brienne the Beauty. And it's really great how Martin gets across the entire point of that character all through the first, time that we're seeing her. Um, Brienne is obviously a fan favorite character. She's a hugely important character, an influential character. Politically speaking, she's the least important person here, probably, that gets like this amount of attention paid to her, at least at this point in the series. But it's a great introduction, especially knowing where that character ends up going. Um, I want to really pay attention to Catelyn's parlay with Renly at the end of it because I think that that's a particularly well written bit. Before we get to that, I thought we would have a little discussion of Renly himself as a character and say what we think of him.
Hmm.
So, what do you think of Renly Baratheon?
He's interesting because for me, I mean, just emotionally speaking, he's kind of a nothing character. I don't mean to say that's he's been poorly handled at all because he's very well written and he has his place. But compared to the significance of everyone else present, he very much feels a bit like a stopgap. I was I haven't fully formed this thought really because I was just considering it earlier as we were preparing for the recording. But to me, I wonder whether or not the tragedy of his death would have worked better if the actual. I mean, people talk about how he's Robert come again, right? In terms of the aesthetics, so he gives the impression that he's Robert come again, but in all of the substance
Yeah.
beneath is very much not there. He's more of like an average political manipulator, and that's pretty much it beneath the surface. As a figure of power anyway, not as on a personality level. But I wondered with narratives whether or not it would have worked better if he had been more akin to Rob, and so that we see, as in Robert and Baratheon, and I guess also kind of Rob, if we'd seen that there had been potential there, that he was on the cusp of actualizing, like we saw the momentum for him being another Robert Baratheon. If we'd felt a bit more of that rather than him just being a bit more airy-fairy, kind of wishy-washy by comparison,
Or maybe even
I think that might have worked a bit better, just so that when he does die and we lose him, it feels more like a tragedy of maybe we weren't rooting for him to win overall with the Game of Thrones because there are other characters we prefer. At least if he had won, then it would have been a better thing for the world, and better thing for the country.
or maybe rather than being an absolute, fulfilling the same kind of boxes that Robert had, maybe if he had been better in the areas where Robert just sucked,
Mm.
like and I guess you could make
Yeah,
the
for
argument
sure.
that maybe
Me
he
keeping the more of the well-rounded kind of pleasant side of things that he does have here, because he does
yeah.
have a lot going for him. It's just he's not got any of the strength behind it. Any of the
I
that
I
people
think
are
it's
seeing when they look at him.
I think it's hard to skate past the fact that Renly is I don't want to call him an annoying character in that it's not that he's annoying page. He's a fun character, but his presence in the story is fundamentally annoying if you want to defeat the Lannisters. Because if he
Mm.
had not done this, I mean, the Lannisters they just would not have won. The Lannisters obviously are hugely powerful and influential and rich, but you're talking about what could have been literally everybody else united against them, which there's no winning that. There just isn't. And so it, if and I think in the next chapter you even get the perfect out from Stannis's perspective where
Mm.
this really didn't need to happen. But yeah, so Renly is just the fundamentally like there's no getting around the fact he's the younger brother by a significant margin, which is another reason why he doesn't have the same kind of accolades as his brothers.
Or the
Maybe he
same
does
brotherly
have some
bond as
potential.
well.
Yeah, he might well actually have some actual potential, but he's so much younger than the two of them that when Robert was winning his crown, Stannis was helping, but Renly couldn't have even if he wanted to. He was like 8 or 9 or something at the time.
Mm.
The others were off waging war. He was by far the younger, and not a particularly serious personality, as we're told, just to add fuel to the fire. But
I mean, we
yeah,
see it
I
in the
just
chapter, just the
yes,
frippery and luxury that he's surrounding himself with, the fact that he's wasting, just risking talent that he has in things like a tourney. He's all
sure,
about the presentation and the aesthetics of rule. We don't see
yeah.
any of the substance behind him. We see, he's well spoken. He's got some clear ideas of what a king should be and how he can fill that role. He's not completely, just empty or anything, but we don't see any of the strength required to rule that you see in all of the other characters. Not that that makes them better rulers.
Mhm.
If you had to choose, Renly would be pretty high on the list. If nothing else,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
advisors could be the strength behind the power. Behind the throne. But
He's
he's just not what he's pretending to be, and what people think he is based on Robert's reputation.
so he and we'll talk about this more. We'll talk about him and how he differs from Stannis in the next chapter because the next chapter is all them all the time pretty much. But he did sit on Robert's council. He was Master of Laws, and I don't even know if people really remember that that was his job because the Master of
I mean, it
Laws
rarely
is
comes up.
it the Masters of Laws, it's hard to say what their job really entails. It's kind of like to give as best counsel as you can give to the sovereign, who will then possibly ignore what you say anyway because they're the sovereign.
Hmm.
So it's for example, we see one in the House of the Dragon, who's Lionel Strong, who was one of your favorite characters for a while. He was the one that you always said was just kind of you kind of were like, does he? I'm waiting for him to like fuck up and reveal that he's a scheming bastard, but
Yeah,
he's not.
it was like, no, no, he's
Like,
just a nice guy.
yeah,
Obvious
yeah,
sexism for the era aside.
yeah. That was like his one, sort of dragging point, but otherwise he was exemplary at what he was in. Later he was Hand, but I mean,
Yeah,
the Master of Laws was really kind of just there to like, give good counsel, and I think you can make the argument that Renly probably did, or at least tried to, for the most part, and I think of him sort of like Littlefinger or Varys without the teeth, because he was trying to get Marjorie. He was trying to cut the Lannisters out anyway and replace them with the Tyrells, which is a
mm,
brilliant notion. If you want to, if you want to get rid of the Lannisters and everything that they're bringing to the table, the only other house you can really do that with is the Tyrells because they're the only ones with that kind of capital at this point in the game. Possibly the High Towers, although they're a bit of a blank spot at
absence.
this
Yeah,
point.
they're
Yeah.
intentionally isolating themselves a little from the
Yes.
political world for whatever reason. Another one of the big question
Yeah.
mark mysteries that hang over the series.
It's also
In
like
tandem with what you
the
said about the Littlefinger part, though, in particular, because I agree, he is that kind of step down, lesser political manipulator and operative in the space. There's also the fact that he is, and this is probably the single biggest saving grace for him in narrative terms for how you can appreciate him as a character. He is also right in how, even though he's using bigger army diplomacy to get around the whole "I don't have a claim" thing, he is also right in saying that he would be a better king. At least the impression we're given as a reader is that that's true, and he clearly
yeah.
believes it. He's not wrong in his grievances against his brothers on a personal or a political level. Stannis is too. I mean, we've seen it lined up in the previous chapters and his introduction. Even he's too brittle. He's too unbending. He's too unpopular. You need some of what Renly's bringing to the table to be a good king. And even though he's not going to be perfect, he would be. I think we can probably both agree he would be a better king overall, right? In terms of
Well,
his
that
malleability and his affability.
yeah, I mean, like Thanos is I mean, I think the perfect metaphor was Donald Noyes, he'll break before he bends kind of a
Yeah,
thing, like and like Stannis is easily my favorite of the three Baratheon brothers as a character. He's such an incredible
agreed.
character. I would not, I think, want to live in a realm where he was king for many, many reasons. He's very complex, and I think at some point we ought to double back around and do Davis's chapter with
Mm,
Stannis, where he explains kind of what drives him, because that I think is worth going into. Um, and it explains a lot of what Stannis's mindset is. And Stannis is, I think, more concerned with results in a way than anything else. And at the same time, principles are very important for him.
A sense of
And
justice and
where,
fairness, but it's that he's most unyielding in, and that if he's
yeah,
wrong,
and
that's a problem.
yeah, and you get a
When he's
sense
wrong.
that both of these Baratheon brothers kind of find a point, like a sort of confluence of conflict, where like the principle and the end result, the ends justifying the means. There is a serious moral question that is of relevance to both of those characters. But with Renly, he's not threatening to do anything as wild as, say, upending the traditional established religion of the setting just to achieve an end. He's not harsh to the point of cruelty as Stannis can be. He does list out what he thinks are his great qualities, that he knows how to be just and fair, but also like strong. And probably most of that in his mind is easier than it really like he thinks that he's judging it on how he imagines it'll be. It won't be as easy as he's imagining it to be,
Exactly, yeah. Which is why we know he
but
won't be as competent as people might think. People around him in the world might think.
yeah,
But yeah, he
and,
has
and
the
Stannis
intention to strive for it at least. And also he's
Stannis would know
charming in
that.
his acknowledging of his
Mhm.
flaws, which is interesting. Like
Yes,
he's like, a
yes.
king must allow a king some flaws. Obviously Catelyn is very
when,
very
when she
amusingly
calls him
pointing out that
humble.
she's not humble. Yeah, it's like 'cause
Yeah,
he's listening
yeah,
like humble
yeah,
humility, and then he's
yeah,
like, well, got to have some
yeah.
flaws. It's
My
hardly the worst.
m- my favorite is we'll come to it later, but about praying. Like, oh, Loras, pray with me. You're like,
Yeah.
like just open secret, like, what lends credence to that, it is that little finger sense of humor of like, okay, right, okay, let's pray together then,
Yeah.
like whatever people want to hear. And again, like that's that thing of just people put on a good show for people, like that's
Hmm.
all that really matters. And like and Stannis is the opposite. He doesn't know how to put on a show at all. And like he's very concerned with the result, and at the same time he is worried about how you get there, in terms of like he wants to do what he thinks is most right, or he wants to avoid what he thinks is most wrong. He doesn't know how to sort of balance those things. Like Stannis is a very complex character, and I can't wait to talk about him some more. But
Hmm.
I do hesitate to be Stannis the Menace, the one true king. I'm not quite.
I mean, I'm fully
I'm
on
not.
board with
I'm
that
not
as a
quite.
meme,
Yeah. I'm not.
but
I'm not.
yeah,
Yeah.
it means should anyone want him to be their king?
I'm not.
Certainly not from
I'm
the
not
list
quite
of
beating
choices we
that
were
drum.
given.
Yeah. But
I do enjoy
anyway.
that
So yeah.
meme though;
So
it's
that's
funny.
that's kind of our thoughts on Renly. I think. Did you have anything else about this, or
No, not in
anything to do with?
particular. Some of the stuff we can go into in detail in terms of how he's interacting with his brother in the next chapter. But for this one, this was
Sure.
mostly a transitional chapter to kind of get us from point A to point B. And I like how even here he's spending the time, like you said, diving into the kind of rich backstory of the family houses, of the different
Yeah.
banners that are being seen, of the introduction to Brienne. All of it is he spends a lot of time on it without ever dragging things down. It's not like, and here's the history of this house compared to this
Mhm.
house and why they're significant. No,
Mhm.
he's just talking and touching on their initial intros as a kind of collective as to why it matters here within the story, why seeing this massive army is relevant, and it's not just a case of, oh, isn't Renly good? This is what Renly represents as a terms of a problem for the plot, and then very quickly
Yeah.
doesn't in how Stannis deals with him. So I like all of this. It's very clever, very well done.
Right. So we've been through most of the substance of this chapter. I want to focus on a little bit of the actual language used towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I think this is some of the best written stuff in the chapter, maybe even, in this portion of the entire book. But basically, there comes a point where we're no longer dealing with all the lords and assembled knights and everything in Renly's camp, and we're just dealing between Catelyn and Renly himself. And there's sort of a back and forth about like um, his version of what happened, and it's largely true of like what happened in the event during the events of book one. There came a point where Renly offered to he had a plan for how he and Ned could take Cersei out of power, basically, and because he was going to actually maybe this is like the one area where his status as like master of laws kind of comes into it. He was going to try to use the gold cloaks to bolster Ned's forces so that they could forcibly remove the queen from power and take her children basically as hostages, or just to outright get rid of them from the equation altogether. And of course, Ned, being Ned, did not want to do anything terrible to children, and so said no. And when Renly kind of, saw the way the winds were shifting and that Ned was not going to join him on a sort of unscrupulous path, he was like, "Well, I better get out of here." So he left, in the dead of night, and never looked back. And so we come to a bit where Catelyn says, um, "Ned refused you. She did not have to be told." This is after he's relayed like what could have been. Maybe I should have said that. Uh, Renly goes, "Had he listened, he would be regent today, and there would have been no need for me to claim the throne. Ned refused you. She did not have to be told. He had sworn to protect Robert's children," Renly said. "I lacked the strength to act alone. So when Lord Eddard turned me away, I had no choice but to flee. Had I stayed, I knew the Queen would see to it that I did not long outlive my brother." And Catelyn thinks to herself, "Had you stayed and lent your support to Ned, he might still be alive," Catelyn thought bitterly. "I liked your husband well enough, my lady. He was a loyal friend to Robert, I know, but he would not listen and he would not bend. Here, I wish to show you something." They had reached the top of the stairwell. Renly pushed open a wooden door, and they stepped out onto the roof. Lord Caswell's keep was scarcely tall enough to call a tower, but the country was so low and flat that Catelyn could see for leagues in all directions. Wherever she looked, she saw fires. They covered the earth like fallen stars, and like the stars, there was no end to them. "Count them if you like, my lady," Renly said quietly. "You will still be counting when the dawn breaks in the east. How many fires burn around River Run tonight, I wonder?" Catelyn could hear faint music drifting from the great hall, seeping out into the night. "You dare not count the stars." That's a really, really well done message. It's just beautifully written. Um, and Renly's not wrong. That is pretty much exactly what happened. It's just we don't see things from his perspective because obviously we loved Ned. And
Yeah.
of course we see things from Catelyn's perspective because like her, we've lost Ned. And Renly probably could have helped Ned do what Ned wanted to do, but that didn't suit his purposes. But again, it's the Game of Thrones. Everybody's
Yeah.
playing it for themselves, right?
And this particular scene, the passage isn't. It's not like one of the greatest pieces of prose in the book by any means, but the actual content of it, the visuals that are being set up for the reveal as he's like they're stepping out onto the rooftop and he's revealing the campsite before her. This isn't the first time I'm going to mention it. It's certainly not the most extreme case because in the follow-up chapter is when it was most striking to me for the sequence. But Martin, as a writer, is very good at introducing kind of very cinematic set pieces into his scenes. So he'll kind of shape a scene and it transitions from beat to beat to try and give that kind of very cinematic expression. So as he's like standing up by the door, he opens a door and allows it to pass through, and you see the campsite as he's illustrating the point. He's not just starting from, they're standing outside the tent and looking over a hill. No, he leads her to the top of the tower. "Here, I have something to show you." Opens it, references the dawn that will be rising on the opposite side. He's very, very well attuned at finding those moments to help reinforce dialogue or internal musings with kind of physicality in the actual space. And again, the next chapter I'll highlight a beautifully crystal clear example of that, for how
Well,
he
this
thinks.
also this also isn't the end of it. This is just sort of it's a beauty. I think it's my favorite part of the writing there, with like, "You dare not count the stars," and him, kind of that's her own sort of like that's her own metaphor for it. She thinks
Mm,
that they're
the
like stars
countless,
with no end.
yeah.
He tells them, "Count them," talking about the fires, the campfires. She's like, "Well, I dare not count the stars." It's the same thing. I like that they're painting the scene together. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So that's great, and it's also not the end of it because then this is Renly kind of flexing on her a bit, where he's like, and we love scenes like this. Everyone kind of does, I think. But I think we'll probably at some point we'll have to talk about the Davos chapter where Lord Manderley. It's about what he's got, like what his resources
I
are
love the
in
reveal
book
for
five.
Mandalay. It's
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. So this is kind of like a lesser version of that, where Renly starts going, "Okay," well, he goes, "I'm told your son crossed the neck with 20,000 swords at his back," Renly went on. "Now that the lords of the Trident are with him, perhaps he commands 40,000. I have twice that number here," Renly said, "and this is only part of my strength. Mace Tyrell remains at Highgarden with another 10,000. I have a strong garrison holding Storm's End. and soon enough the Dornishmen will join me with all their power. And never forget my brother Stannis, who holds Dragonstone and commands the lords of the Narrow Sea. And which is kind of funny, as you've been reading the book, you know that Stannis is very much not about this, but he doesn't know
He's very much a
precisely
problem on
what
the
Stannis thinks.
horizon. Yeah.
Yeah, so it makes sense for Renly to think that, and even the Dornishman claim is really like a little bit like magical thinking there. But he does know full well, as everyone does, that they hate the Lannisters, so it's a
Mm.
bit of a reasonable, expectation. Um, it's a reasonable idea to entertain. I don't know if it's fair to expect that, I should say. Um, but then Catelyn bursts his bubble with, "It would seem to me that you are the one who has forgotten Stannis," Catelyn says, more sharply than she intended. She forgets she's talking to a guy who's calling himself a king there.
Yeah.
"His claim, you mean?" Renly laughed. "Let us be blunt, my lady. Stannis would make an appalling king, nor is he like to become one. Men respect Stannis, even fear him, but precious few have ever loved him. He is still your elder brother. If either of you can be said to have a right to the Iron Throne, it must be Lord Stannis." Renly shrugged. "Tell me, what right did my brother Robert ever have to the Iron Throne?" He did not wait for an answer. "Oh, there was talk of the blood ties between Baratheon and Targaryen, of weddings 100 years past, of second sons and elder daughters. No one but the maesters care anything about it. Robert won the throne with his warhammer." And then this is the continuation of the scene setting that sort of painting they painted together.
Mm.
"He swept a hand across the campfires that burned from horizon to horizon." That's a killer line right there.
Hmm.
Like it again, it's like it's
It's
that
evoking that,
stars, in the
yeah,
yeah.
evoking the imagery of the kind of burning that Clegane's been doing in the background as well.
Yes. He swept a hand across the campfires that burned from horizon to horizon. "Well, there is my claim, as good as Robert's ever was. If your son supports me as his father supported Robert, he'll not find me ungenerous. I will gladly confirm him in all his lands, titles, and honors. He can rule in Winterfell as he pleases. He can even go on calling himself king in the north if he likes, so long as he bends the knee and does me homage as his overlord. King is only a word, but fealty, loyalty, service, those I must have." So I think, this is kind of what we were getting at earlier. Renly does understand politics. He also understands reality, but his grip on it and what he's concerned with is very different from what Stannis understands and cares about. They're both realistic. It wouldn't be fair to call either realistic, but their priorities differ, which is what I think is so fascinating here. And Renly obviously is rather short-lived as a character, so it's easy to dismiss him. He's an interesting character. He's a fun character on page, but there is a part of me that really wishes he would have just. He's right in everything he says there.
Mm.
Like everything in this world does follow, firstborn primogeniture sort of uh, conventions. All the laws of inheritance are that way. If he's going to say that this doesn't matter, you're basically saying nothing matters. You're worth what you can get away with, basically, or if you can get away with
his
taking it, it
his
suits you.
unwillingness to address that, and declare that he's aware of that foundational stone being shifted for this, and not having an idea of how he's going to address that at a larger level, I think is one of the things that kind of highlights just how not necessarily naive but unprepared he is for the more complex aspects of rule that he's going to be stepping into as king. And then, like I
I
say,
do
I
think in
just
that
think,
instance,
what's right?
I was going to say, I think in that instance, naive is a fair word. I think that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't, I wouldn't push
He's
back
not
on that.
fully addressing the concerns of the people, which is something that he
Mm,
claims and believes he's good at doing. He's also coming from it directly from a position of strength in the fact that right now he holds all the cards. He acts like
mm,
he's masterfully pulled off a plan to get all the cards, and to an extent he did have influence over it. It's not like he's just pulled it out of nothing. He has played a part in gaining them, but a large part of his strength is coming from convenience, and then I don't think he's fully, acknowledging that. He thinks, "Oh, I'm a great king. This is coming to me because I'm amazing." He's like, "No, it's because you're the best of a bad, hand that these people have been given, and that can
yeah,
shift rapidly." Um,
yeah,
yeah, and again, couple all of that with the fact that obviously he is gone so quickly. It's very difficult to care about him quite the same way that you do these other characters.
Oh, sure.
Most of what
Yeah.
matters about him is how he dies, not who he is as a
Yeah.
character. He could basically have been anybody, and he would serve the same role in the plot and the narrative. So, yeah, I wondered whether or not making him more like Robert come again, rather than just the aesthetic and idea of that, but actually true on paper as well. How much of that would make him more likable, more of a tragedy that he's gone? I don't know. But even with obviously all the differences that he does bring with his with just his personality and his affability and everything, and the qualities that Robert did lack in. But
Yeah,
I feel like
think
that would have worked better for me personally. But it's not by no means a major issue. It kind of stands out when compared to the significance of all the other kings of the five.
you said that what matters about him is how he dies, and that's certainly true in terms of like what actually happens. Characters like him, I think, are always fascinating in terms of the what could have been kind of angle, which
Mm.
Martin is like flush with. I mean,
The
there's so
patron
many
saint of what
points.
could have been.
Yes, there's so many points in his world where things could go so very differently if only this, if only that, and Renly is a living just giant if only,
Or not living.
So yeah, yeah. An erstwhile, if
Yeah.
only. I think that brings us to an end. The only other thing is that this chat that they're having, this bargaining attempt gets upended with the news that Storm's End is under siege, and he's like, "The Lannisters? It can't be the Lannisters. It's not the Lannisters, my lord. It's my liege or whatever. It's your brother Stannis." So we have to go, parlay with Stannis, and that's, I think, the real crux of what we wanted to talk about today. So let's get into that.
Mm.
All right, so that brings us to Catelyn 3. This is the probably the most fun of the chapters that we're looking at today, and that this is really where Renly and Stannis meet for the first and only real time in the book. Um, Ever, really, because while
Mm.
Stannis was mentioned several times in the first book where Renly was more prominent, you never saw him. And for reasons that will become clear to anybody who knows where the story goes, you're not going to see them together again because, spoiler alert, Renly dies. Yeah.
This is Game of Thrones we're
So,
talking about.
yeah. So it's a really, really fun chapter. And it's also this whole situation, this whole interaction is kind of the driving force behind another one of your in particular favorite scenes, but we both love it, which is, and we'll look at it someday, I think, where
Absolutely.
Cersei sweeps up Tyrion, and they hug each other as they're like laughing at this because the reason why they're doing that is because Tyrion comes in and he's crying with laughter at this letter that says the Baratheon brothers are fighting with each other instead of us. So it's this is
It's
what's
a
going on,
beautiful
which
moment
he's not
between the
allowed.
two
Yeah,
siblings as siblings, which you
yeah,
so rarely see. And I understand why it
yeah.
wasn't in the show, but it's a shame we didn't get to see it lived out there because
Sure,
it would have been heartwarming,
sure.
even in contrast to what we see that they do show. Um, but yeah, and the fact that Catelyn specifically points that out here as well. She says that you're just going to make the Lannisters happy as anything. This is only helping them, and desperately trying
Yeah,
to bash these two guys' heads together and say work together. Like just get over yourself. You can't both be king. You don't need to one of you to be king. Make a compromise and let's get through this against the greater enemy. And they're just not having any of it because
I
brothers
like.
will be brothers, because people with egos will have
Yeah,
egos. It's I like how he's presented all this. The back and forth is really interesting and fun as well. Despite the kind
yeah.
of grim reality of it, it's a lot of good
There's
quips here from
I like
both.
you had mentioned that she wanted to, like, if you were my sons, I'd bang your
Mm.
heads together or something like that.
Just
There's
a
a
note as
bit
well.
in
Sorry, in the show, perfectly delivered.
sure,
She's perfectly cast anyway, but that delivery I loved in the
sure.
show. I can't help but think of that when I
Yeah,
read this.
yeah. There's a bit in the book following this where Sansa meets Olenna, and she's talking about her son, Lord Mace Tyrell, who she thinks is a moron or a boob, and she's talking about all these things, these decisions he's made, like, that she wouldn't have made, and she said, "Would that I have been born a peasant woman with a big wooden spoon, and I'd whack him on his fat head or something." You know what I mean? It's like the things I can't do because I'm a highborn lady. It's like I should have been a peasant woman with a spoon. I'd knock some sense into him. It's so great. But before we dive into some of the dialogue and ideas behind what the brothers are warring with words, really, there's no swords drawn. Oh well,
Well,
Stannis
there is a
draws
sword
his
drawn,
sword.
actually. Yeah, technically.
Yes, yes, yes. We'll get to
Amusingly.
that. Uh, yes, but yeah, I wanted to go quickly over the history of Storm's End as a castle because this is one of my favorite castles in the setting. I don't.
It's
It's hard
very
to pick
cool.
a favorite. Yeah, it's hard to
He
pick a
has
favorite.
so many. All of his castles are awesome in various different
I mean,
ways.
there's multiple castles along the wall that are awesome. There's Winterfell itself. There's Casterly Rock. There's, I mean, the Eyrie is kind of like my least favorite of the big ones, but even
It,
that's
it
awesome.
it's funny because
You
it's one
know,
of the most present and visually iconic, and yet I agree.
yeah,
I kind of find it a bit dull. Like maybe it's the fact that we
yeah.
see so much of it and we get it kind of gets made a bit more mundane, whereas the rest are kind of mythic in their absence. Like the way they're talked about, it's all stories and how they were founded or how they were stolen
I
or all
think
that kind of stuff.
it's also because like the Eyrie would suck to live there. You
That
know
as
what I
well.
mean?
Yeah, it is
Like
a bit
it would
isolated.
get old really quickly, and most of what's cool about it is miserable, like the Moon Door and the Sky Cells. You know what I
Mm,
mean? It's Yeah, so the Erie, we'll talk about the Erie some other time. But I mean, the castle after Dragonstone is awesome. But I mean, Winterfell feels like a cheap, like why Winterfell? So it's the hero castle because it's awesome. Like
yeah.
it's so
The
awesome. Do you know
plumbing of
anything
that
about it?
castle
It's
is
so cool. Yeah,
brilliant alone. Just little touches
yeah,
like that he adds to the story. I love it. It also feels like home
yeah,
because we're obviously seeing it from the Stark's perspectives in that portion. It does feel like home in a way that none of the others can because we just haven't seen them the
yeah.
same way.
Between the crypts and the thousands of years of history, the fact that the water's heated by underground hot springs, and the fact that you have the sort of glass dome covered like God's wood that we never saw in the show, kind of a thing. I mean,
Mm.
it's just so good. I love Winterfell. So I think Winterfell's probably my favorite castle, but my favorite name is to be Storm's End. I mean, Storm's End is such a great name for a castle,
We've
and it's
talked
so
about it
baked into
somewhere,
the
but
legend.
the Baratheons in
Yeah.
general just get all of the best lines. You know, their words, the names, the titles of certain
Ours is the
characters.
Fury. Yeah,
Yeah,
ours is the Fury,
the
the
Laughing
Laughing
Storm.
Storm,
Mm.
the what is it? The name Baratheon is pretty cool. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's a pretty iconic one. Um, but yeah,
Even the stag as their
so
symbol is pretty regal.
yeah, so I also think that this castle is maybe the perfect one for if you're for some reason listening to this and you don't know much about either the show Game of Thrones or the book The Song of Ice and Fire and you just like to listen to us talk or you wound up here by accident and you got this far. Um, I would encourage you to read the books because I love them so much. And I don't even know if we mentioned how much I love things like Dunk and Egg. They're like
Yeah,
kind of
we
like
mentioned it briefly. We haven't talked about. I don't think we mentioned the primer
okay.
enough, but yeah, that's something that we both
Yeah,
really love. The tonal
yeah.
difference between that and the main series is the big thing there. I think
There's
it's
all
a lot
these
more
little
heroic and vibrant in
yes,
a way that the Song of Ice and Fire can't and shouldn't be. But you know, it's a nice
yeah.
little step away from that to make the world feel a little bit more pleasant, despite the horrors that happen in it, uh,
It,
to live
there's
in.
all these little side there's all these little side stories and like literally hundreds of characters that you can get lost in the setting. And so I think that the more that you know about various characters throughout the different time periods, the more you want to know. But sometimes it can be hard to just dive in without a few anchor points to kind of like get your feet wet and feel like, okay, I understand what I'm looking at here. I think Storm's End is one of the best ones. So if you only have like a cursory knowledge of the setting, Storm's End is a good one to get your head around. It'll give you sort of a guiding light as you pursue more history and more characters, or explore, rather, I should say. And that's because this castle might have the single most bearing on the current history as it stands in terms of like the political landscape of the Seven Kingdoms at the point that the main story starts. And so there are different periods of history that have, like when you think of Tolkien, you have like the first and the second and the third ages of
Mm,
things, for example. Um, there's a period called the Dawn Age, and that precedes what is called the Age of Heroes. And toward the end of that, like maybe like right on the border of the two of those pockets of time, I think you have a character, and when you get into that period of things, Martin's very clear. You're not necessarily supposed to take every legend as absolute. This actually happened. It's supposed to be more food for thought and taken with a grain of salt or with at least a degree of skepticism. And it's quite mythical the way that this stuff is written in any event. So most of it has that element of like fable and sort of like most characters I think do believe in a lot of this and a lot of the the great houses like the Starks and others. A
There's
lot
a
of
lot of
their
there's a lot
authority
of
comes from,
there's a lot of consistency to it as well, to the telling,
yeah,
that makes it feel more like a lived history rather than pure
yeah,
myth. But something that one of the reasons it works so well is because he presents it realistically, he presents it believably, he presents it consistently. But the scale to which we're operating at in terms of timeline alone here is so unbelievable
thousands
that
of
it
years.
adds that
Yeah.
mythic element to it. There's no
Mhm.
realistic, quote unquote, and obviously this is a fantasy. There's no framework of believability to the idea that tens of thousands of years could pass with no social or technological development. Pretty much at all happening in comparison,
Yeah.
especially considering the state that the early ages were operating with in terms of what they could build and build to last. But none of that matters
Mhm.
because that doesn't damage the setting at all. Martin leans into it and breathes life into that kind of
And
mythic quality and make it feel like storied and powerful with just the naming conventions alone of things, and how
and
those stories are told through the characters and their
yeah,
perspectives.
and there's like a million and one fan theories that about even if you wanted to go to bat for what for why some of that could happen in a fantasy setting, there are many periods like the Long Night and others where you get the sense that progress could be stalled for this reason or another because the world was like plunged into like a millennia long sort of, literal dark age, like literal dark age, like where there was no sunlight or anything, or times where there could have been more progress, but it was sort of retarded or held back or undone. Certainly, there are organizations like the Maesters, for example, who
Mm,
seem to be pulling some strings in certain ways. There are what happened with the Valyrian Freehold and the Doom of Valyria, and the way that that has been connected in the mind through stories that deal with things like the what are they called? The
Faceless
Assassins and
Men.
Bravos, the Faceless Men. There's ways that you can work around all those things that you might perceive as just not making sense. But even whether you feel that whether you feel that inclination or not, um, Martin wants to assure you, and he said this, in no uncertain terms. He's not saying that everything that happened back then actually happened. Like even in setting, it's doubted by some, especially the educated classes. But the story goes that there was a figure called Durin God's Grief. I don't know if he was born with the name God's Grief, if that became like, his moniker. And he was sort of at war with the god of the sea and the goddess of the wind because he was supposed to have married their daughter, who was called Eleni. And so he built this towering castle because Storm's End is really just like a giant tower, really,
Mm.
and it's on the uh, right off the what do they call it, Shipbreaker Bay, off the sea there. So he built the tower. The gods knocked it down. He built another tower, knocked one down, and it carried on like this. And in true Westerosi fashion, the official telling is that the one that's still standing now is the seventh tower. Everything's seven in this world. Everything that matters is seven. Um, except for the castles along the wall. There's a lot more than seven. We'll talk about that another day. But so yeah, the one still standing, proud and mighty and with little wear upon its seamless stone walls, despite the sea and the raging centuries of storms, millennia of storms, really. And this one guy is supposed to have lived through all that, to have raised it that many times, and all the rest of it. That's the story. It's like this magical, castle that's supposed to have like these runes and these secrets baked into the stone to keep
connected
it from shattering.
connected specifically as well to two aspects of the mythology that come up literally in every single story ever, pretty much, which are the children
Yeah.
of the forest, which are kind of more broadly a kind of second species that inhabited the lands and were driven
Mhm.
off by the invaders.
Fair
And
folk, sort of.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. His Martin's kind of analog for that, and then of course Bran the Builder, who, if we're to believe the stories, was everywhere, always building everything because
Yeah.
basically everything
Yeah.
magnificent. Oh, Bran the Builder did
To be fair,
it.
to be fair, this is the one where they bothered to point out the secret was given to him by a little boy who grew up to
Yeah,
be Bran the Builder.
exactly. And that's one of the
Because
things that
the,
lends
the
to
other
this one. It
ones,
has a
yeah,
little bit more
yeah,
believability in the telling,
yeah.
at least.
The one that gets me on him is the High Tower. He's supposed to have had something to do with that. Now, that I think we can doubt for a great many reasons. He does Winterfell, the Wall, the Storm's End, and the High Tower. that's more than several lifetimes worth of
Mm,
individually each one of them, but all together. But the High Towers, House High Tower will do. We'll talk about the High Towers another time, but they are the oldest like confirmed house in Westeros. They've been around as a name longer than like the Starks even. We're talking like 10,000 years in Old Town there. Um, and I guess the out there is that the High Tower as we know it is not the original tower, so it's kind of a similar thing as this. But
mm,
literally, Brandon the Builder is supposed to have been everywhere, like everywhere ever. And as it probably bears mentioning that given the way that magic works and the way that things like time manipulation are implied to work, some theorize that all of them are our brand, and
mm.
that's kind of like what's like history is being altered, to make sense of all that as he's learning more about magic. But that's another topic for another day. But yeah, so certainly, if you want to, have an asterisk next to any name during the Age of Heroes, it should be Brandon the Builder because he is literally everywhere. But we'll talk about that on a deep dive of its own someday, I think.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, so for thousands of years, that's the story of Storm's End. Sorry, Storm's End. It's this tower that withstands, the sea and also the siege and storming of men. It's never fallen, never, not in all its history. And then you get Aegon's conquest, and this is the reason why I think it's such a good anchoring point if you're kind of new to the larger history of the setting. Storm's End is kind of the seat of several key things that happen. Now, when Aegon and his sister wives did their conquest across what became known as the Seven Kingdoms, um, I guess they were always called that, but when they united them as one realm and ruled from the Iron Throne, there was a fair amount of notable defiance going on. People didn't just go, "Oh, yes, okay, sure." I mean, in effect, that happened after a while of being
After a
like pummeled
fashion.
by the dragons. Yeah, but
The fields of fire and such.
famously, neither he nor his sister queens conquered Dorne ever. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken are the words of House Martell. And I presumably those were the words before that, but they proved it. So they didn't beat everybody. Not everybody needed to be beaten. They just kind of fell in line. The North famously marched to meet the Targaryens in battle until their king, Torrhen Stark, knelt and offered up his crown, as was
That's
detailed in Catelyn's first chapter here.
that's one of my favorite beats of the entirety of the mythology. By the way, I know it's
Yeah.
not actually mythology because it's recent history compared to the rest of the stuff we've been talking about just
Hmm.
now. But
Yeah.
that moment, the way it interacts with how we understand Northerners and the Starks in particular, as well as the characters that we know to represent who the Starks are, specific, personally. The idea that kind of the flip of a coin of being a great hero or a great shame for the house is of
Hmm.
this one who bent the knee, the man who kind of broke the
Yeah.
the streak of the house, and the honor of the house, but doing it for all the right reasons and with absolutely no choice in realistically speaking. It's either that or his entire or his people burn. It's that kind of idea of
Yeah.
kingship and what it means to respond as a responsibility to your people, etc. I love everything
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Every time it comes up, I think like, oh yes,
They call him the king who knelt, but it's
yeah.
also noted that none of his men died, fighting the Targaryens. So, you know, and it was for that he was named Lord of Winterfell, the Lord Paramount, really, of the
Mm.
North. Then,
Which is
and
another
so
is a
and that
name that is absolutely fantastic because we've bemoaned that in our writing ourselves, haven't we,
in our own
Matt?
setting, yeah,
And that Lord Paramount has
Lord
been
Paramount,
taken.
yeah, it's I mean, I could kind of see stealing that one. It's the super iconic things like the Hand of the King. There's no good,
Stand in for
alternate
that.
choice.
Mm.
Like the Hand of the King is just so awesome and so specific to this. You can't just
We've
call it that.
we've mentioned how
But
it's so good. You wondered how it hasn't happened in history. It's like the
yeah,
right hand of the king. How has that not been an official thing that's taken
yeah.
and
And
lasted long
there's
enough?
lots of things. The maesters with their chains of many metals. I mean, all these things that are just so awesome. But yeah, we'll talk about all the things we wish we could have beaten him to the punch on someday. But yeah, that was Torrhen Stark. Then you had people like I think you mentioned the Field of Fire, and that's
Yes,
where the
yeah.
Lords of the West and the Reach had
Targaryens.
their asses handed to them or were annihilated out of existence. That's the reason why the Tyrells have the station that they do. It used to be House Gardner, which traced their line back to that Age of Heroes with a hero called Darth Greenhand. House Gardner said, "We're going to fight the Targaryens." House Gardner died at the Field of Fire. Their empty castle was given to their stewards, so the Denethors of Highgarden. They were made the
Yeah,
new.
much higher in stature than Denethor, I think. Fortunately, or
Well,
certainly
that's
in
why Cersei, for
personality.
example, that's why Cersei has the attitude she does say about the Tyrells. She thinks of them as up jumped stewards because that's what they were. They weren't kings of the rock, like she and her people were. But so that's what went on there. But
Which is
so
particularly funny
you
because of
did
how
have
the Lannisters gained Castle Rock as well. Like their own
for
mythology is
sure.
a little bit a little bit less noble than even the High Garden one was.
Very true. Very, very true. But But there's obviously it wasn't just like a clean sweep for the Targaryens. They encountered defiance along the way. They won in the end because they had dragons. They had three full-grown dragons, including one of the biggest ever thought of, which is Balerion. So the Targaryens win in the end, but they had lots of defiance, and the most infamous of those probably who met pretty sorry ends were Harren, King Harren the Black, who was the one who fell at Harrenhal in the Riverlands. But what really kicks things off, like the conquest bloodletting, is actually the defiance of Argilac the Arrogant of House Durrandon. So this is a descendant, the last descendant of Durin Godsgrief, right? Hence the name
Mm-hmm.
Durrandon. The last of his line to go by to hold the title of Storm King, right? After this, they're Storm Lords, right? So the the bloodletting begins because it's kind of funny. It's almost like this kicks. This is sort of like the final nail in the coffin, where you get the picture, you get the idea that Aegon was eventually going to do something like the conquest with his sisters, but this is really what made it a for sure thing. And what I like about this is the reality of, I say reality, the realness, the feeling of realness that comes from the fact that Aegon doesn't start this. So you have King Harren the Black, who is the king of the Ironborn, who's ruling the Riverlands because he's conquered it. And so Harren the Black has grabbed an entire kingdom. He's made their people his slaves. He's turned their work and their will and their energy to the building of this giant castle of his, Harrenhal, that takes many decades. He's a conqueror king from the Iron Islands, right? Argilac, who we now call Argilac the Arrogant, is the Storm King, and he's watching that go on. He doesn't want it to happen in his pocket, his realm, right? So his idea is, I'm going to create a buffer zone of safety between myself and what's going on in the Riverlands. So I'm going to offer my daughter's hand to Aegon, the Lord, the Dragon Lord, the Lord of Dragonstone. And if he marries her, we'll have an alliance, and I'll throw in some lands into the bargain, and as part of the dowry, and he can have my daughter, and we can stand against King Harren together. The lands he offered belonged to Harren; they were not his to give, and so that's strike one for him. Strike two is that Aegon was already married twice to his own sisters, and he had no desire or need of another wife. Um, Not all Valyrians, by the way, practiced incest on that level. It was a Dragon Lord's thing. It's heavily implied to be part of making sure that the magic doesn't seep out of the bloodline and the control of dragons. So that's why the Targaryens. That's at least heavily implied to be the reason why it's so important to the Targaryens to marry them within the family as they do. Um, we're told that Aegon was never unfaithful to his sister wives either. We're told he never goes outside of his marriages. And at the same time, he saw value in the proposal on some level. And so he says, well, I'm not going to marry your daughter. I'm already married. But if you want, you can marry her to Oris Baratheon. And you can also throw in some of your own lands into the deal as a dowry rather than his. So
Mm.
That was what he proposed. Now, Oris Baratheon is a little bit of a legend, or like I mean to say a mysterious figure in history. It's believed by some that he is a bastard half brother of Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. Whatever the case, he's certainly a good friend of Aegon's and like a battle commander of his, not a dragon lord, but that's who he was. That's who we know he was at any rate. And so his name was Oris Baratheon, and that offer was made to Argilac. He took that as a great insult, and so he cut the hands off the messenger and sent them back to Aegon as his answer. And
Like an
that
idiot.
is, and that what we're told then is, and I love the way it's described. There's like a period of like several days, probably seven, knowing that it's
Yeah.
Westeros, where Aegon like calls his banners and his sisters, and they get together and they sit in council together. And you get the feeling that we're also told he prays in the fashion of the Andals before the Seven, which he wasn't known for doing before. And you get the sense that they're really like, okay, so we're actually doing this. We're going to do this now. Are we ready for this? I mean, we've got three dragons, but hey, I mean, it's an entire seven kingdoms here. Are we going to do it?
Mm.
Guess we gotta. And you get the sense that with a guy like that who's going to cut hands off messengers and send them back, and you're looking at what's going on in the Riverlands with the Ironborn creeping in, and everybody's going around calling themselves a king, and they're not getting together. It does seem to be like we probably need to do this, like or this, especially in light of things like the prophecy,
Mm.
that has become such a big deal since the House of the Dragon, which we'll get into another time. Um, so to me, it adds a lot of air of legitimacy to what the role of the initial Targaryen conquest was about, which is trying to unite the kingdoms against the larger threat. And obviously, things were going to start unspooling if we didn't act. And then we're told a cloud of ravens burst out of Dragonstone.
I love
You
that.
know,
I
going to
love that
yeah,
so much.
yeah,
Such a
every
cool
every
visual.
seat, yeah, every king, everyone who was calling themselves a king at the time, every high lord, every landed knight, everywhere, every tower, every seat, every hall, everywhere got a raven saying, "Look, we're kings now. Fall in line underneath House Targaryen. There'll be no trouble. If you stand against us, it's over." And King Harren stood against them. King Argilac stood against them. They both fell. So Argilac was killed. He left Storm's End, we're told. So his castle was not taken. So the legend still stands. It's never fallen to siege or storm. But he left and did battle and fell against Oris Baratheon. Oris Baratheon went on to actually marry his daughter in the end, which was the initial proposal from Aegon before the messenger's hands were cut off. And for that reason, House Baratheon has ruled at Storm's End as the Lords Paramount of the Stormlands, and they've also done so without wiping out Argilac's line because his daughter, her blood carries on just without the name. So the
Mm.
Baratheons are of the Brandon line. They just don't carry the name. Um, so that is really what was going on there. And that is that was the new status quo. The Baratheons were the Lord of Storm's End from Aegon's conquest until Robert's rebellion. And so I think that's kind of what I mean when I say if you can understand all the ins and outs of the politics that led to the creation of Storm's End as we know it, you now have a good anchor of not since time started, but since like the most important thing in the setting as we know it happened, which was Aegon's conquest,
The focal point of the
politically
last
speaking.
300 years, really, for
Yeah,
where it all started, not counting Dragon's Den.
and you do get a bit of that history, but it's kind of like the cursory version of it. I give a more in-depth, full explanation, but Catelyn thinks about some of this in the initial opening stages of this chapter. But yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say on that one. Indisputably, one of my favorite castle legends, and just like the role it has on everything is so cool. In addition to just the shape and look and feel of all things Storm's
Mm.
End. So we'll probably be returning to this castle for a scene or two later, like when we do more of these in future. But yeah, now on to the actual substance of the chapter itself, which is Renly versus Stannis, if you want to call it that. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, yeah. So going back into kind of the chapter itself, after having that backstory there to the kind of setting of this, and it is such a great set piece to have this discussion. The fact that they're the two brothers who have grown up in this home, their seat of power for the house, are kind of discussing who not just inherits the house itself, but the power of the kingdom as a whole. It's such a great
Yeah,
backdrop to all of this. And as we mentioned earlier on as well, Catelyn being the lens that really gets to see all this through is the perfect choice because she's she has the most personal stakes involved outside of the two directly affected. It, they're going to be king if they win or not. No one else that we know POV wise is affected more by this decision, because she's been sent here specifically to try and bring unity to the two, so that they can face the Lannisters together and have that greater chance. So when it all goes wrong, when she's desperately trying to reach out, which, to be fair, she does, either from her perspective or from the writer's perspective, it's a little bit repetitive in terms of how she phrases it, because after the initial kind of reachings out and mentioning of if you were my sons, etc., like we mentioned before, she does kind of keep going back to the this is folly kind of point a bit, and doesn't really reiterate it or try any different other angles. So it's kind of a failure in diplomacy on that level. But also she's acknowledging in her own mind that there was nothing she could do. There was nothing she could do to stop this. This was always going to happen. The two were too incompatible. They were too dead set on what they wanted to achieve here, and also in complete counter opposites to each other. They can't give up what their claim without completely ceding everything, which isn't in their nature anyway. There's no compromise to be found here, basically.
I think to your point on that one specifically, she also wasn't expecting to do this when she left Rob. Like, she didn't know that there was going to be
sure. She has been flying by the seat of her pants at this point, to be fair.
Yeah.
So she's not like it's a criticism of her character, but it's just it is something to note. It's not one of her shining moments as a diplomatic envoy. Not that that's a specialty anyway, of course, but even within that space, she's usually better than this. But the conversation is the main meat of the chapter, and the relationship between the two brothers being shown and explored through the dialogue. It's a lot of fun. We get the back and forth between the two, and the fact that they are kind of throwing jibes at each other, jabs that only brothers could, or at least land them the same way. We get to see some of the stubbornness and the cast iron brittle nature of Stannis, and how he's reacting to some of Renly's jabs, because Renly's obviously deliberately mocking him and or trying to get a rise out of him at least, and Stannis is not taking it well. I mean, if either of these two has the upper hand, it's Renly, in terms of like the pace of the conversation, the momentum of the points he's making, the emotional response he's getting out of the opponent. I mean, Renly does not care about anything Stannis has to say, but at the same time, he knows, and as we spoke to earlier, he knows he's coming from the position of strength. He is very much.
He also knows how to play Stannis.
For sure.
Which is the funny thing, because Stannis is like the middle brother, and just to make that clear, in case anybody isn't sure about that, Stannis is it in many ways on paper, and in many ways he is the most sympathetic of the brothers, and at the same time he can be he's got a flawed personality. He's very cold. His sense of justice is just so to the point of cruelty at times. And I like the way that characters who are just, one of a better way of phrasing it, just blatantly good, like always call that out. And I'm not even thinking of Davos necessarily, although he's obviously, the most prominent of these who actually Dennis does listen to more often than not. But his nephew, his bastard nephew, Edric Storm, who was at Storm's End, there's a bit where he's talking to Davos about how his fingers were shortened, and he just says he should not have done that. He should not have done that to you. Like, he just has that conviction of just like that was wrong of him to do. See, Davos never thinks it's wrong, but he looks at that and goes, a bastard, a highborn bastard, but still a bastard is like, I know better than this. Like, he should not have done that. Stannis doesn't have that bone in his body. Like, there's legality and there's tradition and then there's rights, and that's how he thinks. And he does have a sense of humor. It's very understated. We'll see a couple of jokes in this very chapter. But Renly got like all the good genes. He's younger than Stannis by some margin. He's also taller. All of the Baratheons are tall. Stannis is the shortest of them. Stannis is the one who's lost his hair. Stannis grits his teeth. Stannis doesn't have a snappy retort for everything. He has retorts, but they're fewer and further between. Like, Robert's dialogue was amazing. Renly's dialogue is also like, he's got that more charismatic, energy to it. To him, it's Renly is very handsome. Renly is what he's wearing even is just so much more. I mean, we didn't talk about what he's wearing, but like the look of his crown. And you wanted to talk about the crowns, actually. Remember, I
really mentioned at the start how it's the start of the Catelyn POV for this book.
Yeah.
Hammers in the focus of the crown with Rob in particular, but through her POV for each of these scenes, following with all the other kings she meets, she takes special note of the crown designs and how they're worn, and it says a lot to the reader about who these characters are. You wouldn't even necessarily need to know anything about them previously, which he's done a good job of setting up anyway, to understand
Yeah.
who these people are and what they represent within the story, and but both in theme and the politics of it all. He's done a very good job of kind of using that motif and carrying it through to set up all of the emotion and the meaning behind this stuff. It's very effective, and particularly with these two brothers as well. The highest point of contrast is between these two, backed up with everything they're talking about. It's huge. Speaking on what you said about Stannis in particular, in concert with all of the stuff that varies about them in terms of just their visuals and their physicality, etc. Stannis, as you said, is all about fair play and law and justice, etc. in his mind. But within that same space, he also sees himself as the aggrieved party. I mean, you say how he's in many ways he's the most sympathetic. He himself would never put it in those terms, but also agree. He's the one who fought the hard fight with holding Storm's End in the siege, and then didn't get granted it as a result. It was given to Renly, who did nothing. He was the one who is in the rightful heir. He's the rightful heir to the throne in the context of the Baratheons being in that check and it not being a Lannister situation. And he's not getting that acknowledgement. He's getting superseded by his younger brother for no other reason than he's more popular and got the army. In his eyes, he is the unlucky one and the slighted one, and that would bother anyone, but particularly someone who's as focused on that not being the way as he is. It's
and as dutiful as he is.
Exactly.
He is dutiful.
Yeah, because he's not all. But, we talk about it largely in negative terms in terms of his brittleness and his hyper focus on these, this sense of justice. But yeah, it does manifest positively as well on occasion. And when the mood's on him, he can be someone who's fair and balanced. It's just that is so rarely the case. He's usually the brittle, horrible end of the spectrum with it.
I think if I lived in King's Landing, or kind of anywhere in the setting, and Renly was king, and there were no, outlying factors like, the Lannisters trying to take the crown back, say, my life would be a lot easier and happier if Renly was king.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going by every tradition, every law, every right, and just talking about sheer ability, should be Stannis. I mean, Stannis is right about all of that.
Apart from anything else, you talk about the good men and good characters in the series. Ned would have backed Stannis. It's why Robb speaks to that earlier in the story. It's Ned would have gone with the Stannis, and if you back anybody in the story up to this point anyway, it should be him, right?
And Stannis says that.
Despite his his apolitical nature.
To draw it to the scene again, it's worth pointing out that Stannis is made to arrive before Renly, and Renly does that for effect. So he can make his grand entrance and keep him be the one waiting, come in with the power. But for a while, it's just Stannis and Catelyn talking, and he says that to Catelyn. He says, your husband wrote me the letter. He's the reason. He's not exactly a smoking gun. He hasn't because Stannis already knew this. Stannis already felt this in his bones that Robert's children were not his children with Cersei. But he couldn't prove it. And it was really like Ned, who kind of gave him the information he needed to kind of like, okay, I'm going to start making my play, which is how the book opens. And that doesn't do anything to ingratiate Ned to Stannis, though. He doesn't care about Ned. And the thing about Stannis is he does not pretend to care.
No.
So it's like there's people who respect that, and to a point I do, but it kind of is the point of him. He doesn't unless you're like Davos or Maester Cresson or like a very, very, very small amount of people that he's kind of grown up with or grown close to over a long period of time. I mean, his own wife, he really can't stand. He's courteous to her. He's polite enough to her normally. There is a bit where
it's all about cold duty with him.
He's cold, yeah. I wanted to say there's a bit with them where the red woman says something like about the Lord of Light or whatever, and she's for the night is dark and full of terrors or whatever, and he's a quiet woman, you're not at a bonfire. He's like, but he has no time. He'll let Melisandre talk that way. His wife will say something in support of like a quiet woman, you're not at a bonfire. It's like he's so embarrassed of her, and she's not to shame anybody, but she's got giant ears. She has like a unibrow. She has a mustache. She's been a genetically unfortunate person, and so you get the sense that like it's very much he's kind of he wants nothing to do with Queen Celise, you know. But at the same time, he does his duty. And it's even phrased that way. He does his duty in the marriage bed like once a
Mm.
year, you know, because he's supposed to. But he takes no joy in anything, and that's what everyone knows about, you know,
Which is
Stannis. That's what
perfect
anyone
setup
can
for this
see.
scene because
Yeah.
that's what Renly plays to.
Yes.
That's the knife that he chooses to twist, and not just in a obviously it's an enduring one. It's deliberately to get a rise out of him, but it's not just that. You can see there's a kind of philosophical point that he's trying to make, and so in terms of like this is why I'm better suited. It's not just the bigger army, though that certainly helps, and you have no chance against it, by the way. But I will be a better king because I have the lust for life. You know, I have the appreciation for stopping and smelling the roses. Or I mean, we want to talk about the specific detail of the peach, which is a fan favorite for probably retroactive reasons. But yeah, it's the whole piece is basically a point in Renly's favor. He's winning this bout of words, leaving Stannis with very little to
I,
work with.
I also think that I know how you were talking about how Catelyn hasn't been like on her A game here in terms of like diplomacy here, but I also think that a solution which no one was ever going to go for.
Mm,
If we're talking about trying to play by the rules, hers is probably the best one because what she's proposing is that everybody puts the crown aside, including her own son, and we all go for a great council kind of a thing.
yeah, and in that
You
and by that
know,
logic, of course, the best person with the best story is Bran, right? It should be Bran who becomes the leader of the kingdoms. That's what the vote would
sure.
be.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while. Thanks,
Sorry
but
about
I really, I
who
really have
has the
done a
best
pretty
story
successful job
or better
of
story than Bran
ejecting that
becomes.
from my brain. Yes. Well, thank you. Now I'm depressed. But so you know, she's very much again, it's one of those things that just clearly no one's ever going to go for. It would it's just not human nature to do that. But and it would dissolve all tension. But you know, and it is fair to say, and the reason why I think it has such I won't say power here, but like weight as an idea is because Robert's own reign was, I mean, not necessarily openly contested. He reigned over a time of peace, but there were certainly people who didn't think he had any right to the throne. He just won. Renly already spoke to that, you know. So there's going to be people who go, well, okay, yeah, Robert won, and Robert was able to hold it. Why then would we follow either of his brothers? And it's quite clear that the Tyrells are using Renly to become the new Lannisters. You know, they don't actually care about Renly. One of them does because it's Renly's lover, Loras. The rest of them are just using him to become the new Lannisters. You know, and that's the thing. You can't even do that with Stannis because his relative power is so much lesser than Renly's. Stannis was master of ships and Robert's council. Stannis is the Lord of Dragonstone, which in the post dragon phase of like Targaryen history and ownership of that castle, Dragonstone is not a prize. It's a stinky, disgusting, horrible place. It's
Barren
remote,
place for the most part.
barren. You know, it's poor. It's just not. The only people that can make that work are dragon lords. You know, it's not a good prize. So it's offered a strategic advantage in that if he is somehow able to pull off getting an army and a fleet, he's perfectly well positioned to attack King's Landing. But that's at the beginning of this book, that's such a hard sell, and Stannis knows it. That's the other great thing about Stannis. It's driven into the reader's mind time and time again. Stannis is one of the best tacticians in the setting. He knows everything there is to know about the strength of every house. He's a proven
Mm.
battle commander. Um, you want people to rival him. You're talking about people like Sam's father, Randall Tarley, who's a terrible person, but a very capable
Terrible person, but a good general.
a capable general. Yeah, but a terrible individual. Um, we actually saw him for a bit, and in the previous Scotland chapter during when Renly was kind of holding fort
Mm.
and playing at king, as Catelyn put it. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it wasn't endearing.
No,
Like
it really
even in just
wasn't.
a short bit of what he said, it was
He's very much
it was
cemented in every single scene as being an ass, which
yes.
helps set up everything that Sam's or back up at everything that Sam's been saying about him, which is nice.
Oh yes,
Um,
oh yes.
we love the visual, by the way,
But
of him having Heartsbane lined up against his chair. It was such a like you can imagine him being making these kind of power moves like that very
yes.
intentionally with the mindset of the character now he's presented.
for sure, for sure. Um, the thing about this scene is, again, so much of it is, as you said earlier, about how well Martin wrote this sort of play contest, really, of words between the brothers and how well they both know each other. It's so snappy, and it's like written for television almost, and a lot of it was translated pretty directly into the script of the show's version of this scene. But I wonder, it would be easy to just kind of go through the entire thing, but we just don't have time for that. Is there any moments, do any moments in particular really stand out for you?
Aside
Because
of the
it's all
obvious,
great.
yeah, I mean the peach is the obvious focal point for it because that's the kind of
The peach,
crux around where
sure.
everything turns. Just in terms of how
Yeah.
the reaction you get from Stannis and when the emotion starts to kind of climb up. Before that, it's mostly just a political discussion of the balance of power and what's right and wrong, etc. All that stuff. It's only when when
So
he brings that out the fruit that the emotion starts becoming more personal and a slight
I
is
love the
taken.
bit. I love the bit where the Red Woman describes the Lord of Light as being, born amidst salt and smoke, and
Yeah.
Renly's like, "Is he a ham? So he's a ham, is he?" It's really great. But that was in the show. But the peach was not. The peach was not in there. So to explain the peach is obviously like a fan favorite scene. I think that we're both together in saying that it's not our personal favorite bit of this. But I
Hmm.
think the peach obviously, so to set that up, you know, um, after a certain lull in the conversation, Renly decides to get his brother's goat by reaching inside of his cloak, and Stannis freaks out and he thinks he's going for a sword, and he pulls out a sword, and Renly comes out with a peach. And obviously, over time, that's taken on quite a sexual connotation. And the more you know about Renly and what he likes to do in his bedchambers, it becomes even more sort of on the nose. But I think Martin didn't mean it that way. I don't think
Hmm.
he meant it as
Similar
that.
with the
A
people discuss the rainbow cloak of his guard as
a
well.
rainbow
It's the
cloak.
same situation. I think it was genuinely, I mean, apart from anything else, the time he wrote this and the lack of social media and
Yeah,
the internet and the way we have now, I think it was genuinely
he
just an obliviousness to the connection.
yeah, the rainbow cloaks. So Renly has a rainbow guard. Each one of his Kingsguard has a different color cloak, and so like the joke people have is, oh, the gay king has the rainbow guard. I think Martin is on the record as saying he didn't intend that, and I believe it for a couple of reasons. You already spoke to like the kind of out of universe reason of it's easier to just be unaware of things in a pre social media age, and Martin's not exactly a spring chicken. He was like knocking on 50 or something when he was writing
Hmm.
this book. So maybe he just legitimately didn't know rainbow, symbolism for the gay movement and everything. But more than that, in setting, and this is easy not to know if you're only somebody who watches the show, the main religion in the Seven Kingdoms is the faith of the Seven, and each of the gods is kind of has represented by a different face. You have the colors of the rainbow as being one of the symbols of the faith. You're constantly told about a sept. We'll have like crystals that filter the sort of light as though from a prism with different colors lighting the place. And so it's very easy to just except that when he was building his world, that was just a quirk of the world building, and it made its way into Renly's court. I don't think it was an on the nose gay joke. If anything, I think that would have been much earlier in the story during the prologue, where the Maester was talking about how when he was a little boy, Renly would go around concerning himself with things like richly dyed silks and velvets or whatever, and
Mm.
he'd go around saying, "Look at me, I'm a wizard. Look at me, I'm a dragon. Look at me, I'm a
Yeah,
king," which was a
that
great,
leaning into the more
yeah,
stereotypical aspects of kind of the idea of the campness that gets associated with his
yes,
sexuality. That
yeah,
I can see that making a kind of an intuitive, natural connection between his aesthetic choices, and that being why he
sure,
would be interested in the rainbow color for the rainbow guard, etc. And oh, let's link it to the gods. I can see that being the natural connection that would be intentional, but I definitely don't think it's so simple as just he's the gay character, so I'm going to give him the
yeah,
LGBT flag
yeah.
as his guard. It just
I mean,
different time
Martin has said he
where that
didn't.
wasn't as known, and also Martin said he didn't, and
Yeah,
I believe him. He's
he
very
said he
honest
didn't
about
know.
things like
Yeah.
this, I think.
He seems honest, yeah. He seems real honest to me in general. But yeah, so but and it's not an offensive thing anyway, even if
Yeah,
it is,
yeah.
it's
It's just it
just
would just be a
there.
connective thing.
the peach though, that we
That
both
one
like
is
that mostly.
retroactive. I'm sorry, that one has
Yeah,
to be retroactive.
yeah,
In terms of its
that
significance, because that's just the way fans have latched onto this is hilarious to me.
the peach and many fruits and flowers and things have always had sort of sexual symbolism, attached to it, in various cultures, and in art just since the dawn of time, really. But
For
the
obvious
peach in
reasons.
particular, I mean, the peach now means exactly one thing, as does the eggplant, as we all know in the emoji age, So it's like that one is something the fans have kind of erected, unintended, in their minds as as like some other thing. But the whole thing is funny because, but what it's really about, what it is really about at its deeper level is that, it's about the fact that Stannis doesn't know how to stop and smell the roses, and that's really like when Renly says everybody should take a time to enjoy, a nice peach. You never know, when you get to do that again. It's quite poignant. He's about to die, but it's also like it is very much what's, if you could say that there's something wrong or off about Stannis in like any objective sense, it's that Stannis has
He's
kind
not
of a
particularly
miserable
happy.
life.
Yeah, he's not
Yeah.
particularly joyful, and he's not the kind of person who does stop and appreciate the finer
Hmm.
things, or even just the simple things in life. He's too much in his own head about his grievances, about his ideas of justice, about duty. He takes things, which otherwise are pretty solid ideas and things that everyone should have clearly in mind throughout the entirety of life, always. But he takes it too far. He takes it to the dry, cold, heartless extremes that gets him into the trouble that he gets stuck into. On top of the fact that he is also genuinely aggrieved in many ways. Like he should have inherited Storm's End when his brother took the kingship. He should not have gone to
That was a
Renly.
punishment.
It was an
That
intentional
was a
slight.
punishment.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
and in the
because
face of
he
him being
was
the one who
told
held the damn thing, he's right to be annoyed by that. But then
for
also
sure.
much of
He
everything else that comes along with that, the baggage of everything we've talked about with how he feels in relation to his brothers and how he's perceived by the public, etc. Like a lot of it is his own ego, and he won't get out of his own way.
I like the in-universe justification that Maester Crescent gave him, where he said, well, at the time, Renly was like a boy, he couldn't hold Storm's End, you had to do it. So maybe it was always going to go to Renly. He just couldn't have him holding it. He had to appoint you, and he did honor you with Dragonstones. Oh yeah, yeah, Dragonstone, what an honor, you know. But I mean, it was because people have kind of lost the thread of what that was about. When it was clear that he was going to be falling, like his side was losing, or at the very least, it was in deep trouble because nobody, including him, knew what side the Lannisters would eventually join in on, or if they were just going to sit things out entirely. When the tides of battle started turning against the Targaryens, uh, King Aerys II, the Mad King, um, and I think that this was after Rhaegar had already died. I think
Mm,
that Rhaegar had already fallen
believe
to
so.
Robert on the Trident. Yeah, he sent his queen, who was pregnant with Daenerys at the time, and his younger son, Viserys, to Dragonstone for safety, so they were no longer at the Red Keep. When the city fell, Robert commanded Stannis to recover the Targaryens that still lived. So Queen, um, I always get her name wrong. It's either Rayla or Rael, or Rayella. But anyway, so the Queen and her children. Daenerys hadn't been born yet. But anyway, that was Stannis's job. He was to see to their recovery and most likely their disposal. But they escaped because of Sir Willem Derry, who we actually mentioned earlier on in this recording. So that is, Stannis captured Dragonstone and everything, but he didn't get the Targaryens. They escaped. And the queen died giving birth to Daenerys, which is why she wasn't around. So that is so all Stannis had, as far as Robert was concerned, was an empty bag, and so that is the reason why. That's the reason it's heavily implied to be anyway. It's we're not in Robert's head, but even Cersei doesn't gainsay this, that it
Mm.
was meant as a slight, so it is
And
very
it's made
much.
very clear that they never had any love for each other,
Yeah.
really. Beyond just the
Yes.
baseline that everyone has to with siblings. There's always that
Yeah.
kind of tenuous biological link almost. But yeah, there was never
Hmm.
anything much more than that between the two, between the three, really.
Yeah.
But there was definitely more love between Renly and Robert than there was the Stannis.
Yeah, and it's also like when you think about how dutiful Stannis was, because he sat on Robert's council all those years,
Mm.
knowing with this grievance hanging over his head. And then when the Iron Islands rose up under Balon Greyjoy, stupid rebellion, as Tyrion said,
It really was a
and
stupid
that might
rebellion.
that I can't remember whether that's a book line or a show line, but it would certainly. I mean, I know it's a show line. I don't know if it's a show line only, but it's certainly correct. Like when Tyrion goes, "A stupid rebellion,"
Mm,
like that. It was really dumb. It's dumb even in this, even when he has a better shot at it. But
exactly.
Greyjoys are. We'll talk about the Greyjoys in a minute. We love some of the Greyjoy stuff, but I mean, it is Balon Greyjoy just sucks. But anyway, the whole idea of this then is that Stannis basically has always had like he's always had a dark cloud hanging over his head, always. And the great thing is Martin. It feels very much like he went out of his way to find new ways to make that clear throughout his life.
He
Because
always
even when you
gets
go
the
into the
short end of the
past,
stick. Always.
I talked about Edric Storm, Robert's bastard, not his first bastard by any means, but I think maybe one of the first he acknowledged, maybe the first
Mm,
son he acknowledged. The reason why he did that is because he's a highborn bastard. Both of his parents were highborn. Robert, was a lord and or probably a king at the time. I forget exactly when this happened.
mm,
But anyway, either way, his father was highborn, and so was his mother. She was a Florent, so she was one of Queen Selese's. Now, Stannis's wife, one of her relatives, was the mother of this boy, and that consummation occurred in what was supposed to be Stannis and Selese's marriage bed, because while the wedding was going on, Robert went back there and had a turn with her, and that's and the image of like Stannis dancing with his queen or whatever at the time that's happening. The image of Stannis dancing we're told that's what they were doing while that was happening, and the
mm.
image of Stannis and Selyse dancing is too much for me. I would love to see that. But it's like even his wedding is like a big farce because Robert ruined it by just being Robert. So like Stannis very much has had a rough time of things, and at the same time he's so harsh and cruel with his sense of what's right and
Mm.
so rigid in that way that even though he should always be in your mind the aggrieved party and the most sympathetic, he finds a way to make you question it. You're not necessarily always on his side because he is so flawed, but he's definitely the most interesting of these characters, as far as I'm in my opinion. I mean, I kind of love them all, but Robert really sucks. Like as a person, Robert's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
fun, but Robert
I mean, as we
sucks.
mentioned with the John chapter as well. I mean, he was never the same once they put a crown on his head. He's not meant to be king. And also the obvious remark from Ned. If he had his way, we'd still be fighting a damn rebellion. I love that. It just sums up
Yeah,
everything you need to know about him.
that's true. And then there's again, every one of these lines is so snappy and good and witty. My favorite from Stannis is probably the one that is most aimed at Renly's proclivities, which is like when Renly's bragging about the fact that his young wife is a virgin. Stannis like in your bed, she's like to die that way. You know what I
Mm.
mean? It's so perfect, and also the perfection of he doesn't really care or judge Renly for being gay.
Yeah, he
Like
he
we're
never
in
raises
this
that as a
setting.
point of personal objection, and more importantly, he
Yeah,
never uses it against him. Like he never goes out and say, "Hey
yeah,
guys, your king's gay." Isn't that bad? Like
yeah.
he
He
doesn't
never says it.
he never turns that knife and
Yeah,
works that angle, which is it's definitely a point in his favor. He has got his own sense of justice and fair play. It's so rarely you rarely get to see it in that positive light that makes him
yeah.
enjoyable. Beyond being obviously a fascinating character,
The
he's not
only
someone you're
time,
resonating with really.
the only context he brought it up in is the one in which arguing brothers would bring it up in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a jab.
It's just a funny thing. Yeah. And you had mentioned the fact that we can go all this way without really talking or commenting much on Renly's sexuality because the strength of character is not
Mm.
about that.
He's
It's
not the
the
gay character. He's a character who happens
no,
to be gay, amongst others that are as
yeah,
well. I mean, everything we've talked about up to this point. Now that's who he is. His sense of
mhm,
self and slightly blinkered sense of his own abilities. But we're working within a competent framework. He is, like you said, a sort of lesser Littlefinger and Varys character, with a lot of natural advantages in his station, to his name. So yeah,
yeah,
interesting character. I just
yeah,
think he could have been a bit more if he hadn't been immediately died. I think
sure,
personally, just from narrative
yeah,
angle, as in if you were thinking of it in terms of like editing something, I think that you could have upped the tragedy if you'd played a bit more into the whole he's the second coming of Robert side. I don't know if that would be just a net positive gain, but I think it would have made it feel a bit more of a loss than just a character we vaguely know has now been killed.
I do want to say before we move on from this bit, and I perfectly agree with what you just said there. But Stannis's offer here also, there are many times where we could diffuse the tension here. And
Mm,
Stannis's offer, this is why I say I find Renly a little annoying,
mm,
because this is a hell of an offer. Stannis offers to make Renly his heir if he stops the silly game and stops denying Stannis's rights. He'll make him his heir. Stannis has only one daughter, a deformed daughter that I don't even know if most of the realm even knows about. Um, I don't say that to say that she shouldn't count, but it is a sexist society.
mm.
He's never fathered a son, certainly not one who lived. I can't remember
He
whether
has the
the weird
dutiful
thing where
type where he
his,
wouldn't step outside of his marriage to then do that as well, which Renly well
yeah,
knows. So this is like a
I
missed opportunity from his perspective. He should really have
even
gone,
remember,
I could defuse this entire battle situation, just kill him later or wait till he dies, and I'd be able to definitely be king without any of the consequences,
yeah,
effectively.
I mean, he could just wait till he dies. Let Stannis do the hard job of being king for a while, and
Mm.
then just inherit. You know what I mean? It's like I do you even remember the weirdness of the show of how Solis has like their sons in jars? I think that was a show only thing. Like Stannis had boys that
Yeah,
never
there
lived,
were a few
and she kept them
weirdnesses
in
there.
jars. I don't I don't think that that's a book thing. I'd have to. These books are so long, and though I do love them, I do miss things, and I'd have to refresh myself on that. But I think he has never had a son, or at least not one who lived. So it just seems like, and Solis is no spring chicken. I don't think.
Mm.
So it feels like Renly had a perfect out to just become king anyway if he would just put aside this. I just want it. I
Massive
just think I
ego.
should be king. you know.
Yeah, but again,
So
speaking back to what we said before, to his credit, he does genuinely believe he would be a better one. So there is at least that varnish
sure.
over the edge of it. He has a point. It's just
Mhm.
so much of it's not a big enough one to carry his personality and or his presence within the narrative because he's such a small player in this larger plot. But yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about for the end of this chapter? Are we moving on to the final one of the four?
No, no, I love that the haunting feeling, of like, Stannis's final words of departure, and how uh the Red Woman kind of backs it up. Um and when I first read the chapter, I didn't think very much of it because it very much seems like the nice thing about the way this is framed is you don't really know whether Stannis has anything up his sleeve. You have the vague impression that the Red Woman is like a power player in this because of the excellent prologue, but you don't really
Mm,
know much about her or what she can do or how or anything like that. So when I first read it, kind of whatever. But because of the fact that the line comes back to Catelyn after the end of the next chapter we're going to look at, really, really haunting. So yeah, Stannis's, threat, or at least his implied threat, um, you're not quite sure what he's going to do, but you know that there's something brewing there, and it's kind of dark and ominous, and it only becomes more so upon a second reading when you know how things go. When he tells Catelyn, "I am the rightful king, and your son, no less a traitor than my brother here. His day will come as well." And at the time, it just seems like Stannis is sticking up for himself. But when you see how things are going, how the very next Catelyn chapter goes, and how this line is recalled at the perfect time in the perfect way, it's just a really perfect way of stringing it together and really, really being, in Catelyn's shoes, thinking of Stannis as like a really dark guy, So I love it. So with that in mind, we'll kind of just briefly go over the fourth captain, sorry, cap I think I tried to say captain and Catelyn at the same time.
Captain
Um,
Chaplain. I mean,
yeah,
Chaplain
so
kind of
this
fits
would
because
be
she's in the church, right?
yeah, yeah. This would be Catelyn 4 in the Clash of Kings. So and this kind of closes out certainly not her run through the book. She's got plenty more after this, but this concludes this sort of part of the arc. This is the
Mm,
this is the chapter in which Renly dies. This is where Catelyn and Brienne kind of become um sort of joined at the hip for all intents and purposes in terms of their plot trajectories for a little bit. You do have just everybody in the middle of an uproar from an upset of one of the kings in this grand conflict has been taken out, and you have the seeds of magic bearing some pretty dark fruit here. So let's go ahead and just this begins in a sept, which is a word for
yeah, I
the
was
a
about to say
church.
it's a nice kind of refocusing back on Catelyn as the character as well, because obviously this is her POV these last 4 chapters, but we've stepped away from her personal perspective a little bit more and focused more on the side characters with or not side characters, but the other characters with Renly and
Yeah.
Stannis, and the larger
Mhm.
political drama. This is where we get to kind of properly take a moment, and she very intentionally takes herself a moment. You know, she takes herself out of the situation, moves it back to away from the camp, goes to find this sept, like you say, and has a quiet moment with her gods. And obviously Martin's using this to properly dive into her internal thoughts and really give her a moment's grief. I'm not even really giving her the grief. That's the best thing about it. It's the fact that she's struggling to not take the moment of grief, and in doing so lets some of that emotion out and helps go through the process a little bit. And he does it so artfully with this presentation, and all while reinforcing what we know about the religion of the setting, and diving more into the world building qualities with how she looks
Yes.
at each of the gods, etc.
Yeah. So the to lead into that, I wanted to say that I really liked the fact that he actually wanted to leave, which I forgot to mention at the between the last chapter and this, and Renly wouldn't allow her to because he's thinking, I'm going to smash my brother. You can witness it, and you can bear testimony to your son about how this is going to go. It is kind of the thought there,
Mm.
and so there's a
Showing a bit of
he's
the
not
darker
exactly
edge to him
being.
as well. That's one of the more
I was going to
sinister,
say,
not fully sinister, like
yeah,
it's realpolitik. He's not being evil or anything, but it's the edgiest with I think we see him in this sequence.
it's not cruel. It is self-confident and it's very hard fisted. You know, it's his attempt at stepping into kind of walking his talk about knowing when to dispense justice and when to withhold it. Um, there is a because he's talking about taking out his own brother here, you know,
Mm.
and at the same time, it's not necessarily just a threat about like I'm going to get your son. It is an honest warning, and it does seem by all rights, Stannis has no business expecting to win this. You know, so yeah, like when you're looking at what forces he's commanding versus what Renly has,
Catelyn's
but
line
I
to that
like that.
effect, by the way, when they get back to the tent, is that you have an odd manner of grief, or the I can't remember the exact
Yes,
wording, but yeah, when she calls
yeah,
out the fact that you don't seem too sad about this, you know, which he does admit, to be fair, he does own up to that. It's like, well, we've never been too close, which is fair,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah. And then the
there is
whole
like a sliver of ice beneath the surface of well, all of the Baratheons, really.
when she calls out the fact of like prayer, it's like, oh yeah, well it's been a while since I've done that. I've kind of forgotten how to do that.
Mm.
And I can't remember what the next, the dialogue's so witty and everything, but in response to like trying to one up what he says, he's just all right, well fine, if you want to go ahead, I'm going to stay here. Loris, pray with me, which is just so funny. Everyone knows what kind of prayer is going to go on in that sense, but anyway, the fact that she had to ask permission to be taken to a sept so that it's kind of like she's what you were saying earlier. She's trying to find something to do with herself. She would not be here if she didn't need to be. She's not been given permission to ride back off to her son's camp yet. These people are about to kill themselves in what she thinks is a pointless and stupid war. And she is I don't think that she's an overly pious character. She's just, you know,
She
she's
lives in
she's
the
honoring the
world.
customs.
Yeah.
She lives in the world. She's trying to make sense of what she can. She's lost her husband. The fates of her family are hanging in the balance. She can't even leave this stupid conflict doesn't want to witness, but she's being made to. What else can she do but pray? I'd be in the same position as somebody who's not even particularly religious. It's just
Mm.
such a great setup for this, and such a great way of having a quiet scene like this where the real action is about to take place right elsewhere, at least ostensibly.
Mm.
But yeah, also I love the how thoroughly the faith of the seven really feels kind of like an analog for like the Catholic Church, really. And you do have this notion of like God is one, but it has seven different faces,
Mm.
and that's you have um like the father and the mother and the Smith and the warrior, the crone and the maid, and then you have the seventh is the stranger, and so you have three that are female and three that are male, and traditional roles applied to what they represent, and then you have the seventh one, which is kind of both and neither and all and none kind of a situation. I really like the haunting description he gives of Martin, I mean to say, of the stranger. So it's Catelyn studied the faces. The father was bearded as ever, The mother smiled, loving and protective. The warrior had his sword sketched in beneath his face, the smith his hammer. The maid was beautiful, the crone wizened and wise, and the seventh face, stranger, with neither male nor female, yet both. Ever the outcast, the wanderer from all places, less and more than human, unknown and unknowable. Here the face was a black oval, a shadow with stars for eyes. It made Catelyn uneasy, who would get scant comfort there. It's a really, really great haunting description.
Mm.
And then I know that you wanted to talk about another
Yes, yeah.
about the
One of the
mother.
follow-up lines to that. I mean, talk about cinematic framing. This is a
Mhm.
man who understands how to present that visual shot in mind, so that we're all picturing exactly the same thing as he goes into the description, with the line, "A crack ran down through the mother's left eye. It made her look as if she were crying." Catelyn could hear Sir Wendell's booming voice, and now and again Sir Robar's quiet answers as they talked of the coming battle. Otherwise, the night was still. Not even a cricket could be heard, and the gods kept their silence. "Did your old gods ever answer you, Ned?" she wondered. "When you knelt before your heart tree, did they hear you?" I love that kind of quiet desperation and that leaning out
Yeah,
for a connection. She's taking the faith and the more ephemeral kind of connection to the gods through her religion and tying it to a personal space for her, to the memory of her husband and that deepest loss that she's facing at the moment, and beyond all the
there,
uncertainty and the fear of everything that's going to come. She hasn't properly grieved
there's
for Ned yet, and this is a beautiful
yeah.
encapsulation of that, along with that gorgeous visual of the tear from the mother's eye.
Yeah, I
It's
was gonna bring it.
perfect.
I was gonna bring it back to that, but I love that. Otherwise the night was still. Not even a cricket could be heard, and the gods kept their silence. And the gods kept their silence. That's the I'm not getting what I need here kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And then there's, did your old gods ever answer you, Ned? She wondered when you knelt before the heart tree. Did they hear you? It's such a perfect because we're told she never. The first Catelyn line is Catelyn had never liked this Godswood, like when she's
Mm.
talking about that's back at Winterfell in the very first book. She feels a stranger, like
Mm.
an interloper in the Stark, holy ground kind of area. Um, is not finding any solace in what she grew up with either. And so I like that questioning of, was there something to that? Is there something to anything? It is what you said, quiet desperation, but also like what you keep drawing attention to, that crack that runs down the mother's left eye. Not only is it great, just on its own, as you're talking about, we know that when Rob dies, she rends her own flesh beneath her on
Mm.
her cheeks. It's like she clutches them, and tears. There's
Bloody tear
terrible wounds
tracts,
there. Yeah.
effectively, yeah, down her eyes.
Yes.
He plays
Yeah.
with imagery like that and calls back to it so
Hmm.
often. Everything, even the stuff that isn't really tied together, feels like it is by the poetic nature and how he presents it.
Yeah.
And yeah, just again,
Little
the
touches
master
like
of the little
those.
visuals.
Little touches like those are what separates like superior writing in my mind, and the reason why a story like this, not least because of its scale, just the sheer page count and how many characters are involved, but
Mm.
that kind of stuff takes thought, and thought doesn't necessarily just come to like I'm going to sit down and write today. Boom, did it. Like things like that, you can't force
Needs
spontaneity. You
time to
can't
ruminate.
force,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't force your muse to just take up action. It's difficult, and he's done. Like I said, this is the reasons like these, I should say, rather, or why even if he never finishes, I'll still always cherish the story. You know what I
Mm.
mean? That's what I'm getting at when I
Yeah,
say that.
it's not
But
reliant on that conclusion. We don't need to have the big what happens at the end
yeah,
explanation for any of this to stand on its own merit. It's artful in its own, in its presentation alone. It'd be lovely to get some of those answers because just apart from anything else, we get a continuation of the story. But like
yeah,
you can't blame the guy for not having delivered that if he never does, because he's given us all this, and it's a privilege, not a right. Getting to see all of this, and everyone needs to keep that in mind, I think.
but very, very perfectly said, I think. And I just love how business of the scene really is. She Catelyn kind of has like a moment of reverie in which she sort of strings together the uh it's not like she's got a smoking gun, but she has a clearer idea of what probably happened at Winterfell the entire time because she was kind of, clutching in the dark, as we talked about earlier when she arrested Tyrion. She kind of she kind of just was playing with the hand she thought she was had dealt, and she knew that the Lannisters had done something, and she was also, I think, given reason by Littlefinger or by Neda's proxy that the dagger used to attack Bran in his bed came from Tyrion. So, which is the reason why she blamed him, I think, at the start of things. But and also that I will say, because I love Martin, but I think that the way that he handled the actual sort of terminus of that mystery with the dagger was a bit of something he pulled out of his ass, where it was Joffrey, um,
Yes, yeah, that was
for
always
no
something we talked
reason
about being a bit
really,
of a flaw, really,
other
because
than Joffrey
it
sucks, you know.
worked. Yeah, it
Yeah,
worked with better
yeah.
with almost anyone else being the person doing
It
it,
works so much better that
but
that
particularly
Littlefinger
with
sets this up,
Littlefinger.
you know, like
Yeah.
yeah, it works so much better that way. And so I every now and then I think that Martin wants to subvert a mystery that people pre-guessed him on without his say, and so he just changes things a little arbitrarily. But I mean, I say that, but I also don't think he does it all that often. That's the only
Mm.
time I can really think of it as something
Called
that
to mind at
actively
the
bothered
moment.
me. Yeah, there's probably others, but that's the one that's already always lingered at the forefront of my mind as being a flaw in what I otherwise think of as a wonderful story. But uh, and so upon realizing that Bran was probably they were trying to silence him to keep secret the notion that that Jamie and Cersei are a coupling, to use the dated term. I always love it when they say it in House of the
Abercrombie
Dragon.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, him too. Yeah, but I was thinking of like Alicent when she's trying to call out Rhaenyra about
Mm.
you and your uncle. It's like what you were, what you know, what just sort of like just like it's just you feel so bad for poor Alicent, but um, but anyway, it's this is her last real attempt at like saying, "Can we please stop this and take the crowns off and have a great council and let's have my son come down and rat the Lannisters out and let's oust them the right way and get everybody back on board and let's do this." And people, no, we're not doing that, Lady Stark. We already told you, like we got to fight. And of course, Renly's the wrong one to. Neither of them. It was never going to work. But he's certainly not going to be the one to hear a petition like this
Mm.
because he's about to fucking win. If for no other reason, he knows he's about to win.
Until he's not,
Yeah,
with
exactly.
what happens immediately following this.
Because shadow assassin, and
Yeah,
that's not a fancy term for an assassin.
but
It's an
before
actual shadow assassin.
before we go
Yeah.
into the detail of what happens and what it kind of means for the story, because this is one of the most, I mean, probably the most,
Fantastical thing.
yeah, exactly, fantastical aspect
Yeah.
element of the story to be, actively shown on scene thus far. I guess with the exception of the White Walkers at the very start, obviously. But what did you think about all of this happening off page? In terms of the preparation, because obviously in the show we had this set up in advance a little bit with the whole, hey, this is coming, leading into the dramatic tension of the scene. Here, you don't really know this is even possible, let alone something that Stannis is actively doing and planning from the get go.
I
Where do
think
you lie on
I
that?
think it,
Because I feel like there's something missing there, but I'm not entirely sure what off the top of my head. I've not thought about it enough yet.
I think it works really well because of the fact that there's a great lack of consensus on what happened. And even as Catelyn is saying what she saw happen to Brienne, she says it doesn't make sense, but it made sense enough to Brienne because she wanted any excuse to go
Mm,
after Renly's murderer, right? So I, I I think it works in the sense that there's supposed to be mass confusion and that rumors are already flying. The rumors of this outpace Catelyn on her way back to Riverrun, for
yeah.
example, and she's going to answer for things there when she gets there. So it works in that sense for me. And that through Davos's perspective, you do eventually gain an understanding of what's happened exactly. I also have to admit that again, this was the this was the last book that the show illustrated for me before I read. Because I didn't start
Mm,
reading these until the gap between seasons 2 and 3 was just like, I can't do that. I have to see where this is going. So I started reading from that point. So I kind of came into this with the cheat of knowing what had happened, as you just said, because
mm.
the show spells it out for you. Um, I don't know. Like, I mean, I could go to bat
I don't mean to think it's like
for either.
anything major. Like the
Yeah,
scene works perfectly well. I mean, very well by
yeah.
itself. But it just to me, because of how it does end up being set up in the show, and because of what we learn later, like you say, through the kind of recollection. I just feels like maybe there could have been something somewhere in there to show, even if it was just like a hint that Stannis has something in mind, like Renly, I implore you, kind of thing. do this or I'll be forced to take measures, or I'll, not in those words because boring and terrible, but just
No, I get what you
giving a
mean.
hint
Yeah.
of the threat of the idea that this is not he's not coming to this deal with a completely empty hand, because it does just seem to come out of nowhere. If you don't know, it's going to come anyway from having watched the show.
I guess I mean
Particularly as well with the lack of
I
any magic in the setting up to this point, pretty much. It is the
well I think
most fantastical extreme as it happens.
there are things like the birth of Danny's dragons is pretty magical, and
Mm,
then the way that this particular book opens up. You already mentioned the others, for example, at the beginning of Game of Thrones. But the way this book opens up, where you have the I think it's just this is why we'll have to look at the prologue at some point, even though
mm,
everyone and their mother already has. It's such a great introduction to the Red Woman that whenever she does something, I don't really question it. And ironically, she should be questioned. A lot of what she does is kind of fakery, but there's also legitimacy behind some of the things she does, right?
mm,
But the most magical thing she does is just not be killed by poison that we know she did drink. And that is low scale kind of magic
mm,
relative to like what magic often is in many other stories. But in a setting like this, that means an awful lot. And so it kind of opens up, okay, I don't know how this was achieved yet, but I can presume magic was involved and I can kind of buy it as it's being given to me.
mm,
Um, I've told you before that one of my favorite moments in the entire series is in at the end of John's journey in the third book when he's treating with the wildlings and the eagle starts burning. And I remember when I first read that,
mm.
I was like, that's the Red Woman. You don't see her do that to people, really. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, there's no doubt in my mind if someone's coming in doing magic like this, and there was just a way that that scene built
It
up
was really
what was going
captivating,
on,
that
and
moment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that blew my mind. I was like, that's the Red Woman. I don't know how she did it. I don't know why she did it, but I know she did it. It's kind of a thing.
Mm,
This, I think, it's hard to place myself in the position of somebody who didn't know what happened because, like I said, I'd seen the show before reading this,
yeah.
but I think it works.
It definitely works for
I
sure. I
Yeah,
can't help. Maybe if I think about it long enough, I'll just think, no, it's ridiculous. It's definitely fine as it is. But I can't help but feeling at the moment that there's something that could have been added in the lead up to this to kind of show and that this was something was coming, and then kind of build that sense of dread, so it doesn't just seem to come out of nowhere. But yeah, it's perfectly fine as it is, though. It's just a miles like niggling doubt in my mind that, yeah. Post in the comments. Let's
yeah.
say what you think.
I, I
Listeners.
sort of like the way that it's explained. Like I said, where it doesn't really make sense, but it's enough to get you backing on your way to getting more information. Where Brienne sort of, she has to fight her way out of this.
Mm,
Because she has to kill some people because they just assume she assassinated him. And then she and Catelyn are kind of having their powwow about what happened, and she's like, "I never held him, but as he died," Brienne said quietly as they walked through the spreading
you can
chaos.
tell that she's
Her
going
voice
through shock
sounded,
in this, by the way. Very, very well
yeah,
handled. The kind of like, I'm just saying
yeah,
something that's completely non sequitur. It's just like, I'm just
yes,
going to
yeah,
blurt what I'm thinking. She's clearly kind of just stumbling
yeah,
through this, going, "What am I doing here? What's happening?"
yeah. You know, Her voice sounded as if it might break at any instant. He was laughing one moment, and suddenly the blood was everywhere, my lady. I do not understand. Did you see? Did you? I saw a shadow. I thought it was Renly's shadow at first, but it was his brother's. Lord Stannis. I felt him. It makes no sense, I know. It made sense enough for Brienne. I will kill him, the tall, homely girl declared. With my lord's own sword, I will kill him. I swear it. I swear it. I swear it. So it's enough that like even if Catelyn was completely wrong about that, even if it had been like Varys,
Mm,
paying Littlefinger to resurrect somebody, like what I mean, just some convoluted chain of things that could never have happened. Even if it had been Joffrey who did it somehow,
yeah,
it's enough to get you to the next point of like, okay, I don't know what happened exactly, but I trust I will find out. He's
yeah,
calling my attention to the fact that this is an open mystery that needs to be investigated. But yeah, to close things out then, I just love, and because it is such a gruesome death, really. I mean, the show is that's what happened. But when I think about it, it wasn't a particularly graphic scene. It was just, he was killed.
yeah. I kind of
It's
like the
exactly what happened,
yeah,
but
just a note. I kind of like the 2D aspect of it in the book, like the way it's literally just the shadow
mhm,
cast against the wall, and then the blade comes out from through his back. I
yeah,
like that. From memory in the show, it's a bit more of a 3D kind of shade effect,
yes, it
wraith
is.
style,
Um,
which I
yeah,
understand. It works, but I kind of
sure.
like the subtler aspect of it. I think there's something creepy, and it's been used to death in animation and everything about a second shadow kind of disobeying like the movements of its caster. That has always been a very evocative image for me. And that, having that idea
I think,
of the sword of Renisword being sheathed and seeing it being drawn in the shadow behind, I think that could have been a really powerful shot.
yeah, I think that that also probably is a selling point on why the version as it is in the books does have something going for it because there isn't any build up to it. It just does happen,
Yeah, I mean, when I say build up,
which
I
is
mean I don't
cool.
need any kind of explicitly stated she's going to do something.
Yeah,
I could have used more of an edge of a threat to the dynamic
sure,
between the two, like because he does just
sure.
seem to come to the situation no cards in his
Hmm.
hand,
Hmm.
whereas it's just something from the Red Woman she mentioned, like be wary of something, or he states, is I'm trying to help you, brother, or whatever it is, something that hints that something might be coming, and then this ends up being it would have worked for me, I think.
Well, on that point, I like that the way that you phrased it about, that it seems like he doesn't have any cards because this is the proof that he does have the
Mm,
cards, however he got there, and it's a
exactly.
really well written passage there of so as they're leaving, as the long fingers of dawn fanned across the fields, color was returning to the world, where gray men had sat gray horses, armed with shadow spears, the points of 10,000 lances now glinted silvery cold, and on the myriad flapping banners Catelyn saw the blush of red and pink and orange, the richness of blues and browns, the blaze of gold and yellow, all the power of Storm's End and Highgarden, power that had been Renly's an hour ago. They belong to Stannis now, he realized, even if they do not know it themselves. Where else are they to turn, if not to the last Baratheon? Stannis has won all with a single evil stroke. I am the rightful king, he declared, his jaw clenched hard as iron, and your son, no less a traitor than my brother here. His day will come as well. A chill went through her. Perfect chapter ending.
Oh yeah.
And I love the way he wrote that last bit
Capstoning
there.
everything she's
Like I
saying in the
said,
present with that callback to what
yeah,
he said from the previous. It's the fact
yeah,
that it gives new meaning to that previous lines. Oh, now he has the power to back up what he was saying.
yeah, yeah.
It
And I like
perfectly
the way you
chimes with that
phrased it.
sinister tone.
I like the way you phrased it about having cards in the hand. It's clear now that even if you have questions, there's no question he has cards in his hands.
It's a perfect tone shift and capstone to everything we've seen leading up to this. I love how he adds that chill and that thrill and that horror to the end sequence and kind of properly ties all this in with what's to come. This has been a very kind of a side sequence where it's focused on mostly Catelyn and the political kind of equation. There hasn't been too much of an eye beyond what's been seen on page here. It's all been internal or actively the relationships that we're seeing in the scenes. This it works to kind of show, as you said, Stannis is now the man with the cards, and what's he going to do with them? It sets up everything to come. I really like that. But more than that, these chapters I like is to cover them in four in one go. I like these as a full segment of Catelyn's presence within this book. Like you said, she does have POV chapters after this, and she does more material
Mm.
of some of which we may cover. It's all good stuff. But this is like a nice self-contained little side story that specifically wraps around her and her perspective and what's going on. I think it works nicely in that we get to see the large part of who she is, reinforced both on what we knew from the previous book, but also following on to this new material now and this deeper material, particularly in light of the fact that she's grieving for Ned. I loved going through it. I loved revisiting it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more with other characters, as you say. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so am I. Same here.
yeah.
So it's a really fantastic chapter. That kind of closes out our look at Catelyn, our deep dive into what she's about in the Clash of Kings. Probably we'll pick up some other Catelyn chapters at some point, but not for a good long while, I think. There's plenty of
Mm,
other characters to look at before that, and we'll probably do some of these in other authors' works and also maybe even Star Wars
mm.
before we get around to that. So thanks for joining us today. I've had a ton of fun, but now my watch has ended. Time for me to go to bed.
An excellent outro. I still don't have one. Goodbye, guys.